Good afternoon. Welcome to the October 25th, 2021 special meeting of the Board of Education. Time is 4:30. We will begin with roll call, but before, I want to make note that Chair Foster will be absent today. She will not be joining us. Chair Ellis, can you begin with roll call? Or Director Ellis, I'm sorry.
Director Kopp. Director Cadillo.
Here.
Director Ellis is here. Director Vu.
Here.
Director Broderick.
Here.
Director Allen.
Here.
I would like to remind everyone that this meeting will be live streamed. Next, I'd move to approve the order of the main agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
So seconded by Director Ellis. Vote, please.
Director Kopp.
Yes.
Director Cadillo.
Yes.
Director Ellis is yes. Director Vu.
Yes.
Director Broderick.
Yes.
Director Allen.
Yes.
Vote to approve the order of the main agenda passes 6-0. Next, I'd move to approve the permit for in-street pedestrian sign program for safe routes to school. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Director Kopp. Vote, please.
Director Kopp.
Yes.
Director Cadillo.
Yes.
Director Ellis is yes. Director Broderick.
Yes.
Director Allen.
Yes.
Director Vu.
Yes. Okay. Vote to approve the permit for in-street pedestrian sign program for safe routes to school passes 6-0. And I will turn it over to Superintendent Gothard and staff. Lead us through the Envision's SPVS updates.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Vu, members of the board, staff, and community. Thank you for gathering this afternoon for us to provide another update on Envision SPPS. Tonight, Chief Turner will take you through a presentation, and I know we also have some guests from our early learning team as well to talk about program developments in that area. With that, I'll turn it over to Chief Turner to begin tonight.
Thank you, Superintendent. Vice Chair Vu, members of the board, and Superintendent. Tonight, we will provide additional information on questions that you had asked previously. One of those questions was around who lives actually in Area C. We're going to give a little bit more information about how we plan to keep the buildings vibrant, the buildings that are being recommended for closure. Then most of the evening we'll spend discussing early childhood and the ideal around what the actual early childhood hubs include. There is a team here that I'll introduce in a little bit that will go more specifically about that. And then we're going to close out really spending some time discussing how community members, parents, and others can get involved, get accurate information. I think there was a question last time about Area C, and there was discussion around who actually lives in Area C, and Area C is kind of over in the north and east side area, and the question was when we were discussing Johnny Johnson being merged with Bruce Vento, how it would actually look, and is there enough space, and it was brought up that there are other schools in the area that families can choose from. So this shows you there's about 2,490, so about 2,500 students that live in that area, K through 5th grade. That's who we're tracking right now. And what I want to bring your attention to is the number of schools that you see on this particular grid. And you'll see that a number of students within that area actually attend a number of St. Paul Public Schools. Now, the largest one is Vento, with 315 of the students that live in the area actually attend Vento. But our families have access to magnets and other community school options in that area. So while that area is highly dense with a number of students, it's been historical that students in that area support schools from all throughout the district. And that was just that specific in the actual specific information that was asked earlier. One of the other questions, and we had some discussion last week quite a bit about what are the plans and how are we be able to keep our buildings vibrant and continue to have them be part of the community. And so I just wanted to clarify a few things for both the board as well as the community, is that the early childhood education programs, and you'll hear more about that from the team here this afternoon, but LNFI, or La Torre du Nord Lower Campus, is being repurposed in the fall of 22 to a early childhood education program, to our early childhood hub. As is, we're also recommending that Galtier is immediately repurposed into a early childhood program for the fall of 22. So those particular, if this vote were to go through, those two particular programs would actually open in the fall of 22 that will primarily support our earliest learners. The plans for Highwood Hills, Johnson, Jackson, and Leap, we will discuss our overall plan of how we're planning to engage the community and stakeholders and how we would make decisions on those particular buildings. Just as a reminder, and we discussed this last week, but Highwood Hills will continue to, the recreation center will continue to be open, that the city leases that space and they plan to continue to do that. And so the community will continue to have access to the recreation part of the building through the city's lease, Park and Rec. Wellstone as well, it wasn't mentioned last time, but I just wanted to remind the board as well as the community, we also have a joint use agreement with the city for that recreation center. So that programming will continue to be, happen throughout, even if the building, the education side of the building does close, that particular part of the building will continue to be open for the community to have access. Also, we have our own department, Title Services, is connected to that particular building, and those services will continue to operate out of that building. And I think it was maybe Vice Chair Vu that talked about what type of things would we look at. And this is really just a pool. This is not an exhaustive list, but we wanted to give some ideas of some of the things that buildings could potentially be used for. We have a process that we like to talk about using to get to this idea or to get to the decision. But we could use some additionally for Early Childhood Hub. You will hear from the team in a few minutes about the need to continue to be able to have buildings for our earliest learners. We could look at things such as a service and student support center, what that actually means. We would need to get to that, but we know that we've heard a number of things around supporting families in the community through consolidated services, whether that's the city, the county, and the school districts providing services at some of our buildings. We know that there's strong interest in college and career centers. We have some resources that from some of our partners that are very interested in that model. We also know that one of the buildings, John A. Johnson, is actually one of the sites that does have air conditioning. And so that building, we do plan to continue to use that for summer school. Obviously, we told the board last summer, and we'll continue to, that we will prioritize our air conditioned buildings for summer school. We also have the Cruz Guzman coming up that we don't know exactly what that's going to mean for our district, what parameters are going to be given of how we think about a program, but in the event that we actually have to create or generate or open a new program that's a magnet program, we would have a building to be able to do that. And of course, we will need to continue to always have a home for our online staff. This year, we were able to make things work with another program that didn't have a school in it, but we are going to need to always make sure that we have a physical space for our online staff to work from. So we are proposing that we use the following timeline, that between now or the time after the vote in February of next year, that we continue to do some analysis on the buildings with the help of the facilities department to really determine what could potentially be the best uses for buildings, so that we don't have the community going down an avenue for A or B knowing that that building would not necessarily be a good use for it. So they will conduct analysis with the intention of external focus, not just internal focus, but with external focus. So there may be some buildings that may be better for the public to access and use than other buildings. So that's the type of analysis that they'll work on and do. Anticipating that they will be done with that analysis by February, And then from March through May, we'd actually work with stakeholders, particular stakeholders on buildings. So that would be Park and Rec, maybe the county, neighbors, partners. Every building will have a different stakeholder group, but we would actually do stakeholder engagement during those particular months. And then we would bring the board in the summer of '22 what we found and what we're hearing from the community regarding the needs for the buildings in particular neighborhoods or areas. And then the board would have that information, and between the fall or the summer and the fall of '22, we actually would begin to implement. Some buildings may take longer to actually implement a design. Other ones may be able to open program right in the fall or the fall of next year. But really, we would take that time to begin implementation of a transition to what the repurposing of the new building or the closed buildings would be. And just to give you an idea of how that actually might look in real time, we use Wellstone as a model off of it. And so if Wellstone, the decision was made to close the Wellstone building, that we would take that time to, between now and January of '22 to actually do that analysis that we talked about. And we know on this particular building, and I think Director Parent talked about it last time, that we know that there's anticipated infrastructure work that we were planning to always do as part of the SPPS builds. And that's working primarily on the mechanical system there. That work was not scheduled to be done for another couple of years, but in the event that that building is actually vacant, the recommendation would be to begin that work earlier for two reasons. One, because the building would be vacant. Two, we can save a significant amount of money by moving the time period up and shorten the time period. So that would be what would be done for the construction. And then as one of the sites opportunities that we said earlier is that there may be some buildings that we would use as a spot for while other buildings are being constructed. And so we do know we have a number of buildings that are taking place over the next several years. And as you heard with the American Indian Magnet community, the different scenarios that in the event that we were able to relocate a whole school program during construction, it's helpful for the learning environment as well as it saves a significant amount of money because you don't necessarily have to stretch out construction over 4 or 5 years. You can maybe stretch it out 18 months to 2 years. So in the event that the Wellstone building would be open, we do believe based on the number of buildings that are coming up for construction, there would be a program that could potentially relocate there for a couple years while their building is being remodeled. And that would save time, and then it would also save the opportunity for students not to have to go to school during construction. This is not a plan. This is an example. I will say it is an example, obviously, that administration and I as a COO would support, but this is not a decision because the board has not made the decision yet on the whole program. But this is just gives you an example. So what you see here in this timeline with the different colors, we would have one of these specifically for every one of the closed sites. And Vice Chair Vu, I can take any questions that board members may have regarding Area C as well as the timeline for the vacant buildings.
Thank you. Do you have any questions from board members?
Yeah, I had a couple questions. One was about Highwood Hills. And then is there a date that is set to diminish that lease or contract even years out? Or what happens when that lease is up?
So through Vice Chair Vu, Director Allen, yes, the lease currently goes through 2025. And at that time, the city has the opportunity to renew that lease or not.
Okay. And then I've been meaning to ask this, but it keeps coming up, and so now I really want to ask. But can we ask for a presentation from the lawyers that are involved in the Coos-Grossman case so that we can make decisions based on what we know instead of based on what we don't know. Because this keeps coming up like, we don't know what's going to happen with the Coos Grousman case, so we're going to do this. I want to make a decision based on what we do know.
I'd ask General Counsel Long if you would provide additional information.
Through the Vice Chair, members of the board, Superintendent Gothard, Director Allen. So right now, Cruz Guzman, they are in trial preparation for that. They are in discovery right now, so they're exchanging evidence, developing reports, those types of things. That process, I understand, will end in February of 2022 with the trial date starting that fall. So because they're still in litigation, there's going to be probably not a whole lot that any of the attorneys are going to be saying publicly at this point about it. I mean, I can tell you, where they're at, and we do know the proposed bill that came before the legislature last year, which was an attempt to resolve that case. As we know, they had, I think they had one committee hearing on that, and then the legislature did not pursue that any further. So that's sort of the status of it right now. As to the merits or the strategies or anything like that, I would imagine that those attorneys would be rather hesitant to say much publicly.
Then that makes it really hard to make decisions based on what we don't know. I just can't bring myself to do that. I'll dig deeper into it. And I know a couple of the lawyers that are involved. I could ask more in-depth conversations, but I just think that, this came up in more than one situation where they've said, well, we don't know what's going to happen with the Coos Grousman case, so we're going to decide to move in this direction. And I don't want to make decisions based on what we don't know. I want to make decisions based on what we do know. And so, I don't know. When it's possible, can we please have a presentation from individuals that are involved so that we have a clear understanding of what the stipulations of this is going to be, or can be, or will be, or is by the time we get it?
Yeah, Vice Chair Vu and Director Allen, I agree with you. I've been working on this since 2015, May of 2015. So in 2 different districts, I put a lot into this in terms of how it could work out. Essentially, what we tried to arrive at a situation where a judge did not have to rule at how we lead and operate our school districts. When that was unsuccessful, it had to go, it went down this path that we're currently on. So it is a little bit out of our control in terms of the timing of it. And I can assure you that as soon as there is information that either the board needs to know to consider any decisions or any litigation, anything in that matter, that you would have the opportunity, but also just updates as well.
Thank you.
I had a follow-up question on the proposal that Director Allen brought up, and I'm wondering, and this is a question for anybody who may want to answer, I'm wondering if a presentation can be made on hypotheticals, such as what would happen if the plaintiffs won a clear case and we had to, I know we're not going to be able to get clear opinions from the parties involved at this point, but can we get an analysis of what are the potential risks that we face as a district in our enrollment and in the way that we build our programming, and what is the potential for us to be making decisions right now that may be cornering us into losing enrollment? And that's a concern that I have, especially around Cruz Guzman. Is that something that can be done without incurring any, legal issues?
Through the chair, Director Creel, I think we have to keep in mind that we are not a party to Cruz Guzman. So the information that the plaintiff's attorneys have and the defendant's attorneys have, we're not privy to that because we are not a party. So it's going to be, it's difficult for us. I mean, we're not to be able to say to those attorneys, oh, send us the kind of information and things that you're talking about, because they're in the midst of litigation. So any of that type of thing would be discoverable. Them doing a case analysis of pros and cons for us, I mean, that really isn't something that either attorney for either side is going to do, because again, we are not a party to this matter. Even though we are interested in it, certainly we need to be watching it, and we are watching it quite closely. In terms of information from the attorneys and the parties and so on, we're just not going to have access to that.
Director Broderick?
Thank you very much. And thank you, Director Allen and Carrillo, for those two good questions. And I kind of keyed on the word hypothetical that Director Carrillo mentioned. And I think that's really, unfortunately, that's where we are at, because we don't know the specifics of what's going on with that case. And yet at the same time, hypothetically, a decision that could be made in that case could really impact, obviously, our school district, but also could potentially make some of the decisions we're making possibly this next month on Envision SPPS. We could possibly have to backtrack on some of those. I'm thinking in terms in particular of the fact that we have many charter schools in the metropolitan area which are de facto segregated. And we also, within our own school district, in an attempt to respond to desire to have culturally responsive curriculum, we have some of our schools that are, in essence, also segregated. And as Envision SPPS unfolds, whether that trend will continue with us at SPPS and with our charters may or may not play out. But at the same time, we are looking down the road at a potential decision by Cruz Guzman in the Cruz Guzman case that could force us to change some of the decisions that we're actually trying to make this fall and this winter. I know I went a long way around the barn, and I understand exactly, Consul Long, that you're giving us good advice as our attorney, in that you're limited in being able to tell us what's going to, well, as you and I both know, you can't predict the future, and you certainly can't predict the outcome of a case, especially one of this significance. But I think the questions that both of the directors have asked really beg the question of, are we kind of going upstream in terms of making decisions which could hypothetically or really, in reality, could be, we would have to change. And I've talked myself into a corner already, ladies and gentlemen. So I think possibly either the response from either Chief Consul Long or from Superintendent Gothard can help my muddled mind, and can certainly maybe address the two good questions from my fellow directors.
Vice Chair Vu, Director Broderick, a few things that I want all of us to keep in mind. First, I was very clear with Chief Turner and the Envision team that 10% of our student body is all I wanted and felt comfortable with bringing forward at this time, that it would be impacting as it relates to any decisions that are made, at least as it stands right now. The other piece is in their analysis in the Envision work is by demographics, it almost matches identically in terms of the student characteristics. And that was something that we were very mindful of. Now, what I'll say is that if and when we get any decisions that we would have to abide by as it relates to Cruz Guzman, we would have to look at it as a district regardless. Whether the decisions we make it could potentially have an impact on everything that we do, not only in the, schools that are part of Envision as it currently stands. So I look at that as obviously having potential to have further rulings on schools that are impacted by Envision. But that's something we're going to have to take into consideration when the time is right, regardless. I'm not saying it isn't important. I'm not saying that we shouldn't. And that's why it's in here, because I didn't want anyone to be surprised if, in fact, we do have to make some decisions. But again, we're talking about 10% of our district. There's still 90% that could be impacted by Cruz Guzman as well.
I better defer to see if I muddied the waters for my two colleagues, or whether, do you still have the same questions?
I mean, yeah, I don't think no, your questions were valid. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions from board members?
Maybe if I could, through the chair, just add one additional to Dr. Gothard's statement, and also General Counsel Member Long, that might help, is that just as long as Dr. Gothard was there at the table, I have been as well as I was at the table for the Choice is Yours program, which is a very similar program that took place in Minneapolis years ago. So keep a couple things to keep in mind. Whatever decision that Cruz Guzman does come down with, it will be inclusive of regional. It won't just impact St. Paul Public Schools. It will impact Minneapolis Public Schools, St. Paul Public Schools, and the region, so the suburbs as well. So anything that we do is going to have to be inclusive of likely all those parties. It will also be additive. So it's not going to likely be something that's going to take away choice. It would be something that would be additive to parent choice and options. So the ideal around potentially having empty buildings is that in the event that there was something where we were to create together, we would have the physical space to be able to do that. So regardless of, like Dr. Gothard as well as General Councilman Long said, if something comes as a rendering of a decision that impacts our internal choice system, any policies around that, that's going to be regardless of what our buildings look like. But the intent of leaving some of the buildings without a specific program in them would be that we could be able to identify a physical site in the event of a new magnet program were to be born or created among all. We would have a physical space to bring to the table to offer to the other districts involved in it. But I, as the board, eager await, the decision. But so the intent around that, the buildings, was really to be potentially to be ready in the event of that we need a physical space.
Director Kopp?
Just one quick follow-up on the Cruz Guzman case. So it begins in fall 2022, and so the anticipated duration, decision, we would be looking at waiting. I mean, we would not be revisiting this if we are waiting. We'd have to wait 1 year or 2 years. And so I think the difficulty in this decision is often in the balance of there's consequences to acting or not acting in any of these situations. And so that's part of the heaviness of this, that we weigh, is that we wait, there's consequences, we act, there's consequences, and how people evaluate the effectiveness of those consequences is different. But I appreciate the question, that we're thinking about it and that we're anticipating the opportunities. And should that decision go one way or the other, the whole landscape changes. And it goes far beyond even what we're doing here. But I'm glad we're talking about it and we're preparing ourselves for it. So we're ready to meet the moment when it happens.
Just to add to what Director Kopp said, I would ask Chief Counsel Long, I said before I wouldn't ask you to predict a decision of a court or to predict the future, but could you guess as to what the timeline will be in terms of when this will finally become something that we will know about?
Through the chair, Director Broderick, and anything would be just that, a guess. Because there's no way to really predict what, I mean, is the judge going to decide, will the judge side with, which party the judge will decide with? If the judge sides with the plaintiff, but then what is the remedy that the judge would order? Is the judge going to order something themselves, or is the judge going to order something that would then take legislative action? Will there be an appeal? Will there be an appeal to the appeal? There's just so many variables, Director Broderick, that really to try to put a timeline on it would just be a guess, and I really don't know that would be helpful to the board in its decision making, because it would be such a guess.
Well, the reason I thought it might be helpful is because of what Superintendent Gothard said, that whatever that decision may be, and whenever it does come down, that we as a school district will be in a position where we're going to have to abide by it and work with it. And so then I think if I was reading, and I don't want to put words in Director Kopp's mouth, but what I kind of heard her saying is, would it bode well for us to wait on a major decision like this because of that decision now pending? And that's, I think, when we start talking, and now I am really in the realm of hypotheticals and possibilities, and maybe even getting my colleagues upset because they're saying, well, that's not what I said, Broderick. So, but I think these are the kinds of discussions that we do have to have as we're looking at making a major change within the next month or so.
Dr. Ellis.
Chief Turner, we were talking about Highwood Hills, and so I wanted to ask about this lease program. and one, we're a school district. How did we end up with a rec center?
The Vice Chair Vu, Director Ellis. So our buildings are for public use, and anyone can lease or permit our space. And the space that is adjacent to or attached to Highwood Hills is a, I hesitate to call it an actual recreation center because it's not your typical recreation center that you will see of the size of it, but we have used that with the community, and that's what they call a recreation center. But it actually is two smaller rooms, and we give access to the gym, and that's what primarily gets used is the school's gym in the evenings and on the weekends, and oftentimes when school's not in session. And so, but the actual space next to it, it is owned by the district, and so that's the part that they lease out. So they lease out, and we provide the custodial services as we do with all of our permits.
Okay, because I remember being on the board, getting on the board in 2016, and initially that wasn't part of the school district. Like there wasn't a lease, that wasn't even a part of the building from what I understood at that time that we used. So something changed between now and then back in 2016. What exactly happened?
Through Vice Chair Vu and Director Ellis, the city gifted us that property and building space. So I don't know if Director Parents, you want to add any more specifics? There may something else that Director Parent may be able to ask around the historical of how we actually obtained the property, but it was a gift, was it not?
So what I'm trying to figure out is if in 2016 this wasn't like a part of the building that we as a school district used, we didn't use it. And then in 2016 something shifted and it became part of the city, the lease that we're providing for the city. We provide custodial services, but I'm like something in there changed. And so how did it go from being unused to now it's used, and now it's ours and not the city. So the city wasn't able to afford to do that, to open it, or we just were there and available. And so then we decided we would continue with that space as well. Like I'm just a little confused.
Through Vice Chair Wu, Director Ellis, a little bit of all of that actually took place and occurred. Thank you, Director Ellis, for going back through kind of the historical piece with Highwood Hills. So initially it was the school district had the entire space. And the city actually had that portion of the building. The city decided after they did a utilization study of all their spaces and their needs that there was no longer a need within their portfolio of buildings to maintain that particular site as a recreation center. As a part of schools in the community and wanting to be able to continue to offer some space for the community, we made an agreement with the community as well as the city that they would continue to have access to that. And so initially we were doing some informal type of agreements and made it more official a couple years ago. And so the lease is actually a bona fide lease with the city to lease the space so that it actually is a recreation center. So they staff it, and then we provide the operational supports, custodian supports of the building. We have a number of partnerships throughout the district like that, and the city and the district are good partners. And so we also saw it as a value add to be able to have a space for the community to participate and do enrichment activities, extracurricular activities on the weekends and in the evening.
In here it says programming to continue. So does that just mean the lease, or is there some sort of programming being run out of the recreation rooms plus gym?
Thank you. Through the Vice Chair. So the lease will continue of the actual gym and the other rooms that the community has access to. That will continue. So they will continue to operate that as a recreation center till 2025. And they'll make a decision at that time if they plan to renew their lease. The community can continue to permit other spaces of Highwood Hills just as they can any of our other buildings. The building will not, the community will have access if they maybe want to permit the library for something or the cafeteria for something, they're having an event, they will continue to have access to that as well.
Okay, and so, all right. Okay, that answered my question. And then the other question that I have is on the options for keeping buildings vibrant, and we have the new magnet option. And so I'm curious as to what the criteria is now for a magnet school, and like how maybe that may or may not change, or has that changed, the criteria for a magnet school?
Your Vice Chair, Director Ellis, no, that hasn't changed. And that one is specifically is aligned with Cruz Guzman. We know that if a decision is rendered, it will likely need to be a magnet school, identified as a magnet school. And I shared, I think, in a couple meetings prior to this one, that typically a magnet school has 3 goals or 3 primarily focus areas. One is that it typically covers a large transportation area, geographic area. It typically has a unique focus or program delivery. And then it also has a goal of being intentionally diverse, socioeconomic as well as linguistic as well as race. So those are generally the 3 factors when you try to open a new magnet school or create a magnet school or support a magnet school.
Okay, and then it says new magnet option. And so what I'm trying to figure out is, are we talking about creating a magnet option?
Through the Vice Chair, yes. If it was determined that Minneapolis or St. Paul or Cruz Guzman says that the regional area has to create a new magnet school, then we would have to open a new magnet school.
So that's like open new magnet school question mark.
Yes, and as others have said, it is a question mark because we don't know what will happen with the Cruz Guzman. But as we look historically at other similar lawsuits that have taken place, typically it does include a school, physical building, and it typically will be a magnet school.
Okay, so then here's a concern that I have, and I'm just gonna put this out here. So if we were not looking at Cruz Guzman, let's just say that, that's not there. Would that still be something we would be trying to figure out if we are creating a new magnet as a district?
Vice Chair Vu. At this particular time, given that we have an excess of 8,000 seats, no, I don't believe that we would be trying to create a new magnet school unless we were taking off other schools to have a kind of a paired amount of space. So it wouldn't necessarily be in our best interest to create a school that would all of a sudden bring on 1,000 new seats capacity if we're also don't have a way to take some of those seats offline. And I think that one of the most important things to keep in mind with the Cruz Guzman is that it's not likely to be something that is inclusive of only St. Paul. This is going to have to be something that likely families from the suburbs are going to have access to. So it would have to be something, a school likely or a site likely that is someone on the perimeter, would be large enough to be able to incorporate enough students. So as we look at our buildings, the ones that we suggested, I don't know that at this particular time if any of those buildings would be the most appropriate. But again, this is about being ready and prepared. That in the event that it is determined that Cruz Guzman or the lawsuit determines that St. Paul Public Schools needs to have a building, then we would potentially be ready for it. I think it's too mature to just assume that one of these buildings would be the ones for that. I think it's too mature to assume that St. Paul Public Schools would have to open a brand new magnet school. It may be determined that one of the suburbs is a place where the magnet school is physically located, and St. Paul Public Schools just has to offer that as an option and transportation to get to that particular suburb, to get to that building. So just as we are planning and looking, all of our first ring and second ring suburbs are also part of this potentially, and so they would likely have buildings as well.
Right, it's far reaching. I understand that. Chief Turner, from the package that the board is currently looking at and reviewing, how many schools are magnet on the list?
I think Director Williams, are you in space? I want to believe of the list of, so through the chair, Vice Chair, Director Ellis, do you mean of Highwood Hills, Johnny Johnson, Jackson, and Leap, or do you mean of the schools that are on the actual
All
list?
the schools that are potentially impacted in the package that the board is being presented. How many of them are magnet schools currently?
Through the Vice Chair, Director Ellis, Jackson is considered a regional magnet. It may be helpful if I go through the area. That would be helpful to me.
Okay.
So Area A, Parkway is a magnet school, currently Montessori focused. And in Area B, there are none. Area C, there are none. Area D, Riverview is considered a regional magnet, but that program is staying in place. It's the community portion that's being recommended to move. Cherokee is currently a magnet, Montessori. E, Wellstone is currently a magnet. And in Area F, Obama.
And Chief, my last question, from the schools impacted, part of the package, how many of them are Title I schools?
I'm looking out to see if there's some help out in the audience for me. Oh, maybe Chief Schroll, are you able to help me with that one? Again, if you let me go through the areas, that might be helpful. Um,
So
you want to make a clarification? Chief Baker, looks like Cherokee's not. Go ahead.
To the chair, yes, thank you, Chief Turner. Cherokee is a specialized program, but does not have the expanded transportation availability. They are specific just to Area D.
Thank you, Chief Collins, for that clarification. So, what I would prefer to do, Director Ellis, so I'm clear on the title, we can go through with early childhood or any other questions, and before we end this evening, we can get the Title I schools, because I want to give accurate information.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
I had a question.
Yes.
So I want to go to slide 4, Chief Turner, and look at John A. Johnson at 225. Students attend. So John A. Johnson is going to merge with Vento, correct?
That is correct.
So this is a good example of how placement's role in this actually works, because I'm thinking about it from a family's point of view, that if I choose Vento, if I choose to go to John A. Johnson to Vento, then it's pretty much a go. But if I don't and I choose another school, and I'm looking at some of these other schools in my area, just how is that actually going to work in terms of placement? Can you just walk me through maybe an example?
I can. Vice Chair Vu, so in the event that I currently attend John A. Johnson and I don't want to look at Bruce Vento as an option, because they will have a guaranteed seat at Bruce Vento, but as a family member, I decide that I'm not interested in that and I would like to look to one of the other options, which I believe on there is St. Paul. I'll just pick one. Let me look at St. Paul Music, which is a magnet school, a regional. If I decide that I'd like to go to St. Paul Music, I would need to fill out an application by the deadline, and that's regardless. That way we can know who's thinking of what, and it helps us to be able to set the schools up for the upcoming school year. So I would fill out an application and say that I'm currently a student at Johnny Johnson, as that's one of the questions that's asked. So as soon as the student placement knows that they are a student that currently goes to Johnny Johnson, they will get identified with a particular lottery code that will give them closed school or merged school. In this particular case, it's not a closed school, it's a merged school. So they would receive merged school priority. And if they are applying to St. Paul Music, let's say 3rd grade, then as we do the lottery for St. Paul Music 3rd grade, they would get in before other students that are applying for 3rd grade for St. Paul Music. So how this would happen is the students that are currently in 2nd grade for St. Paul Music would get placed first because they automatically roll over. Then we would place siblings of St. Paul Music, and then we would place the students who are impacted by a merge program. So then they would receive space at St. Paul Music. In most of our schools, if we get the information ahead of time, so part of this will be, and it's another reason why we are actually encouraging the board to take action in November, it allows a team to prepare all of this and communicate with families and make sure that we can implement what we say we're implementing when it comes to school choice. But part of that will be to make sure that they get their request cards in on time. Because once we know that and we see, then that way we can determine, we work with the Office of Schools and the Finance Office, you know what, next year we need 4 sections of 3rd grade instead of 3, because we have 20 students from Johnny Johnson who have decided that they would like that to be their school. So when we know ahead of time, when we have space and we have time, we can help to be able to accommodate families' request. Is that helpful?
That's helpful, Chief Turner. My only other question is regarding around expectations, right? Say, for example, if for whatever reason St. Paul Music was full or at capacity, then what would happen? What's the next trigger?
Thank you, Vice Chair. But then we would look at their second choice. And so we encourage all families always on the application to always list two choices. And that's actually part of the process when a family member fills out a request card. They go through a verification part of the process. And if the application is not filled out correctly or is missing something or the birthdays don't add up or they've asked for a school outside their busing area, student placement follows back up with that family. So in this particular case, let's say they applied for a very popular magnet program and they have no second choice. Student placement follows back up with that family and says, Mr. Vu, you've listed X school down on your application and you don't have a second choice. We're strongly encouraging you to fill out a second choice because you've listed a very popular program and there may not be enough space for you. So we give families plenty of time. They get emails, they get letters, they get calls if their applications are missing information or just if they have not made a choice that is very helpful for their situation. Sometimes we have families applying for schools that are outside their busing area, very popular schools, and in schools that very few seats open up. We help them through that process.
I suppose my next question after this is just regarding like special education programs, federal setting 3. I know that some of these buildings have them in the building, but they choose a school that, I'm just thinking about a scenario, right? That if they choose a school, I guess they have to be accepted if they choose a federal setting 3 school, right?
Yes.
They're just not going to be.
Vice Chair Wu. So the students who are in specialized program, they will receive a whole personalized call, treatment, care, almost like case management. So again, as soon as the vote is made, actually, Executive Director Brenda Natalia and her team, as well as Marcy Dowd, will reach out to students at particular program where there is a federal setting 3 program and talk about now that X school, the board has voted and X school is closing, your child currently attends a federal setting 3 program at that school, we're going to help you find a new program.
And just one more question regarding that. In that same scenario where if they choose a school that's full for whatever reason or at capacity, what happens after that?
So if they continue to go with the school where there's not capacity, they would go on a waiting list and they would receive closed school or merged school priority in that waiting list. So as we continue to monitor the waiting list all throughout the winter as well as into the spring and summer, they would be some of the first students that were moved.
Thank you, Chief Turner.
Just a couple of things I wanted to clarify with my colleague. So I'm not mad at you, but I want to just clarify my point earlier about the consequences of waiting. And I think what we heard was we don't really know how long the Cruz Guzman case, how long it might take or what it might kind of impose on us. I don't know if that's the right word to use. And so in some ways we're in a difficult situation, but I think we have to be prepared to steer our own ship and then be prepared to react to what might come. And so, but I have appreciated that conversation. I just wanted to.
No, thank you very much. And I think that's one of the things that we sometimes don't do enough of at board meetings, and that's deliberation between the 7 of us. And so thank you very much for clarifying that, and appreciate it.
And I did just have one follow up about the for families who will be choosing new programs if these recommendations are approved. If it's not already part of the plan, I'd strongly encourage some in-person opportunities for families, on school sites at places where families are, just to make sure we're really giving everyone that one-to-one attention in a space that's comfortable for them and not kind of relying on people to fill out this form or go to this website, really to be with our communities as they're transitioning through this. So if that's not part of the plan, I would strongly encourage that to be included.
Vice Chair Rue, Director Cobb, we will add that. We've typically done similar things to that.
Dr. Broderick?
Thank you. Because I was asking follow-up questions, I failed to ask the question that I wanted to ask early in the meeting. And that is, ordinarily I wouldn't reference a newspaper article at a board meeting. On the other hand, because so many of our families do use the newspaper as one of their primary sources of finding out what's going on with the district. And in yesterday's Sunday's Pioneer Press, there was an article that contained just this short paragraph, which I would like, if you could, Chief Turner, because it's somewhat of an indirect quote of something that you were said to have said. And so I would like very much so that there's an understanding for people who did read this of what you meant. But the reporter said, Turner said it wouldn't have been fair to ask the community to decide which schools would close. It's better, she said, to present a plan and then solicit feedback. And could you, because we're sitting right now at a point in time where we are going to be voting on a plan, the plan, on November 16th, could you clarify what you mean in terms of feedback from community prior to the vote on November 16th, and then feedback to the vote after November 16th?
Sure. And through the Vice Chair, Director Broderick. So what I believe I said was that as we were developing Envision SPPS, there were about eight criteria that we were going to use to make recommendations to the superintendent and the board. That included facility utilization, so how we use the building, data on enrollment, school choice data. We were using information regarding the historical, just how well the building has been asked, market demand. So there are a number of criteria, and I shared those last week as well. And we also said that Envision was going to be based on data. And so as we put together a plan that included the over 120 stakeholders and the 11 work groups, that we felt that it's responsible in order for those work groups and administration to do that work, that heavy lift. And it is an unfair proposition or question to ask the community, because oftentimes community and parents, what they are basing their decision on, which they should, is their child, their individual child. As a administration, as a superintendency, and as a board, collectively, we should be basing our decision off of what's in the best interest of the entire district, and so that we are here for another 50 to 100 years. And so that is why it was best to use information based on data. And it is not our practice, based on the international public participation model that this board also agreed to use, to go out and ask questions that of parents or community members, and we can't generally take their answer. It's a very difficult question to ask a parent if you want to close your school, or to ask a staff member. And it's unfair, it would have been unfair and irresponsible to go out and survey staff or survey families and say, please check the schools you would like to close. So as a administration, we felt like we needed to be able to do that work that's based on information and data. And so that's what I meant to say. And if it wasn't perceived that way, I would, I'm okay saying to be corrected now. My intentions were to bring forth this board a recommendation that the team has put together based on data, and that there will be a time to be able to ask community members and parents for their feedback. And there will be a time for them to actually get involved. The time is not now. The time would be once the vote would be given, rendered.
Well, then, Chief Turner, that begs the question then that I think I asked last week, and that is, how would you define the task of this board between now and November 16th in gathering the amount of information as we are doing tonight, and in terms of gathering information from the community that is going to influence our decision on November 16th? I think as elected officials, we will, by the nature of being elected officials, we will be listening intently to communities between now and November 16th. And so what do you, as an administrator, and maybe I should also ask this question then of Superintendent Gothard, what would you say that our role is right now in terms of analyzing this plan that we are going to vote on its entirety on November 16th?
Through the Vice Chair, Director Roderick, I would ask that this board respond in the way that you agreed to do, which was to adopt Envision. And we were clear from the beginning that SPPS Envision would include decisions based on data. And this is another reason why this is new. These work sessions are new. This is your work sessions. We, as an administration, I think that we've been responsive in getting your questions. So this is a time for you to ask your questions, get clarity. And if you're not clear, ask more questions. And the team stands ready to answer those questions for you. And so that's really what these special sessions are meant to do, so that you can review the data and review the information. And make a very tough decision. I think we have all acknowledged that closing schools and making program changes is never an easy decision to do. But this administration stands ready, committed to offering you a recommendation that is steeped in data. It's also aligned with the strategic plan that this board also voted on to adopt the strategic plan SPPS Achieves, which is part of SPPS Achieves, was to align school programs with its facilities. So this is all linked to decisions that this board has already made before. And as I stated last week, we can, the board certainly, because it's your decision, you certainly can use different criteria to make a decision. But the simple fact of the matter is that we come with years of experience recommending a decision and recommendation based on years of data, historical information, years of market demand, analyzing every single building, and to provide the best recommendation that we felt we could put forward.
So I think what I'm continuing to hear you say, Chief Turner, and I think what I heard from Superintendent Gothard at the beginning of the week, or last week, I should say, is that you are suggesting that we as a board should be prepared to vote for the entire package that is being presented to us, Envision SPPS. And my trouble is that between now and November 16th, I've already heard, and I know everyone else on this board has heard from members of the community, that they are absolutely opposed to certain elements of that total package. And so if you're saying that we agreed to support Envision SPPS, does that mean that we already have agreed to support the entire package in spite of the fact that we may hear from our communities between now and November 16th that there are elements of the package which they find devastating to their communities or to their programs or to their schools, or as you said, and probably most importantly, when we hear from people individually, to their child at their school. And so when I asked the question last week about whether it would be possible to extract certain elements from the total package between now and November 16th, and now I've kind of gone full circle, because what I think I continue to hear from you is that you would prefer that we don't do that.
Through Vice Chair Vu, Director Broderick, I don't, if I give the impression that this is an individual or what Jackie Turner or Chief Turner wants or doesn't want, I didn't mean to do that. So it is this board's decision.
I'm sorry if I phrased it in that way. No, I did not. Unfortunately, Chief Turner, whenever you take the podium, no, I'm not hanging anything on you personally in any way, shape, or form. I'm just suggesting that what you were saying in terms of representing what administration is saying. So no, I beg your apologies if you thought there was anything personal involved in that. No.
Through the Vice Chair, then Director Broderick, I think one way to start maybe is to ask yourselves individually and then collectively as a board. Part of the reason that we put this plan together so that all of our students would have access to a well-rounded education. So if you start with that premise or that belief that all students in St. Paul Public Schools deserve that, that should be the basis of your thought process or your decision. And if you believe that certain students should have access to a well-rounded education and certain ones shouldn't, then you may come up with a different belief or a different vote. But we have put together what we believe, what we need to do based on our funding model so that all students have access to a well-rounded education. And the reason why it is an entire package or entire plan is that when you begin to make a decision, for instance, to leave one school program in place, it does impact another school. So you've now made a decision that maybe one school does have a well-rounded education because of size, but based on another school's decision, they may not, because it was both of those programs were needed to be put together in order to offer a well-rounded program. And so it is interrelated, it is interconnected, and this is why it's based on all the years of data and information and analysis, because this wasn't just put together at the whim. Several staff, as well as community members, parents, teams, put a number of hours into this plan. And so I don't know if Dr. Gothard has anything to add or.
Through the Vice Chair, Director Broderick, the only thing that I'd add to Chief Turner's comments is, so I'm in agreement with her. To answer your question around kind of the board's perspective and what they should be doing during this time, I'm in agreement of asking the questions. We're doing our best to make sure that we're talking after you ask the questions. Chief Turner is kind of giving us our marching orders to get that information, to bring that back. So, of course, we ask that you continue to do that. We are not saying that board members should not get perspectives from the community. There is, to me, and I'll speak from administration's perspective, a little bit of a nuance on that. Even though the board members are receiving information from the community, you were elected by the community. As Chief Turner said, ultimately, the request will be to keep a program the way it is. And right now, that is, in some instances, opposite to some of the recommendations, the comprehensive recommendation that we're bringing before you. The other thing, too, that has not really been talked about as much is if the board doesn't, so we've been saying if the board does nothing, but if the board also does little, So if the board says yes to some and no to others, there are also ramifications to that that this district and administration will have to deal with, and ultimately the board will as well. And so I think that a lot of times we're always thinking of kind of all or nothing. So if the board does nothing, or if the board does everything that administration says, but right now, in addition to the excess seats that she's talking about and the projected budget shortfalls that we're dealing with, I'll speak very candidly. We will be back before you, just in a different manner.
And I know Superintendent Gothard would like to speak to it, I'm still anguishing over this decision, as you can tell from the tone of my voice. And I'm not really, I'm still confused after listening to Chief Turner and to you, Chief Baker. But rather than me continue to display my uneasiness, I think I will turn to my other board members to see whether they have questions. And right now, I know I interrupted Superintendent Gothard, so please go ahead.
No, not at all. Thank you. Through the Vice Chair, Director Broderick. I'm trying to think of a way to share this with the board. I mean, if we are to conduct this meeting in a way that provides you the forum to mix and match recommendations, we would need time for validation. We would need time to reach out to new communities who could be affected by that. So in a sense, it would start the process over, or it would start, at least the revelation of the schools that are being recommended over. So that's one thing that I'd like to point out. I mean, we clearly waited with anticipation to announce this set of schools to the community, and we certainly have heard the feedback. That same could be true if the board would make a different recommendation from this dais and provide us the direction to involve schools that weren't named in the initial comprehensive recommendation. So I just want to share that. The other piece is that Chief Turner is going to get to, and I don't know if it's before or after the early childhood presentation, a discussion about ways that the public will be afforded input in the next couple of weeks here. So that is coming up yet too.
Thank you very much. And I think I will take some advice from our Vice Chair, Director Vu, and I'll sit and allow the process to work. Although at this point in time, right now, I'm very uneasy.
Any further questions from board members?
Yes. I had 2 points of information I would like to have. One is we have two different budgets that kind of go out to the schools. There's the allocation and then there's the actual revenue. Can I get both for all the schools that were impacted? And then also, I know you guys did some population breakdown for some of the schools last week. Was the Hmong immersion program in there? Both like Jackson and then the Phelan? It was?
Vice Chair, I believe it was, but I can look why the early childhood is going on, and we can clarify that.
Okay. All right, those are both the pieces I needed.
And then, just so I can clarify, do you mean the demographics of the school?
Yeah. I'm speaking Spanish, yes.
Director Allen, if I could also just clarify FTE by way of allocation and then discretionary money or money that goes into general budgets or
yeah, so what is the general revenue that is, so there's the allocation that happens in April. Yep. But then once we realize what the actual enrollment is in October, there's actual revenue number, right? That we can say, oh, this school generated this amount of revenue into the building based on Title I, any kind of special ed and the regular gen ed revenue that comes into the building based on enrollment, right? I want both of those numbers, the April number and then what was the final one. And if I can get it for 2016, 2017, and then 2017, 2018, and then 2018 and 2019 for all the buildings.
Got it. Thank you.
Questions? I just had one more question about slide 9 regarding a timeline for repurposing sites. The first bullet point, building analysis. Didn't we have this done already before we vote? Is there a reason why we need to do it again?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wu. Good question. Yes, because I've asked the team to, we primarily did an analysis of internal focus and for school programs, aligning programs with facilities. So it was primarily looking at educational programs. So I've asked the team to do a rather quick analysis of buildings that would need to be able to welcome partners. Because as you know, some of the options that we looked at would potentially include external partners. And so there may be buildings that may be better suited for external partnerships, such as where their entryway are, such as where they are, how closely they are to a bus line, whether or not they are, air conditioned or not, how accessible they are for adults. There may be certain of our buildings that are better suited for elementary age program versus adults or vice versa. Parking. So that type of analysis. So it's a different type.
Thank you, Chief Turner. And for the next bullet point, March, May 2022 stakeholder engagement, site utilization facts. I just want to make sure that we have an understanding about expectations for that one, because I'm looking at slide 8, and some of those may take longer than that time allows. Can you comment on that?
Yes, thank you. Vice Chair Vu, you're absolutely right. That would give us some initial feedback for at least those couple of months. There may be some buildings, for instance, you're about to hear early childhood. So based on what we learn and know with early childhood, we may know right away that we have a need to have 2 additional physical sites for early childhood. And I don't know that it's going to take much more than 2 months to bring the early childhood partners together, as Dr. Gothard and members of this team have been meeting with the early childhood community for going on 2 years now. And so that engagement has already been happening, taking place. So there may be some examples that 2 months is going to be enough time. If it's determined, a good example of that would be Bruce Vento. Bruce Vento, we anticipate that 2 months is not going to be enough time. We actually would do an entire process with our SPPS builds for that, which is going to take much longer than 2 months.
Thank you for clarifying that. And just one more question about the board update, summer updated findings. Will any of these proposals or findings come to the board for approval for implementation?
Thank you, Vice Chair Vu. If it's determined that there's a certain policy that needs to be voted on that impacts that decision, yes. If it's an administrative or superintendent decision that the board policy is not impacted, then no, it would be more of an update.
Okay, thank you. And just the last thing, this slide is for repurposing sites, but there's also merges, and then there's other sites being opened up for middle school. I just kind of get a timeline for those as well. Are those within the same timeline as well?
Vice Chair Vu, are you specifically referring to Obama?
For example, I'm thinking like the Vinto, John A. Johnson. I would like to know how much work is put into those that effort to merge those programs, right? Just kind of be clear about that and be updated as to how seamless or how laborious that merge is, and that goes for some of the other merges. And then there's the Hmong dual language, and cultural studies. They're opening a new building in Parkway, right? It's supposed to be a middle school, but there is no middle school pathway model for them to build that program out. I think that something like that requires more of a plan to build that program out, make sure it's successful, make sure it's supported. are those mergers and openings all going to be within this timeline as well?
Vice Chair Wu, thank you for clarifying. So no, the buildings that you see and the timelines you see here today, think of the bricks and mortar. That's physically, actually, purposely for the buildings that are vacated or where there's actually no programming in. The merged buildings, the repurposed buildings, is actually just if I remind the board, I talked about it last week. The community will have all the way from November 17th, if the vote takes place on the 16th, they'll have from November 17th all the way until school opens. And that's really where the engagement takes place, where we actually call receiving more than just input. It's actually then where families are working together to create a new vision for their new merged school. And that's, remember what we talked about before, I believe it was Director Broderick asked about the grade configuration for Parkway. And we said that's one thing that there's some flexibility in that. We want to work with the school community for the upper portion of the Hmong program. That is it best suited for the program to be a 6-8 at Parkway or 4-8 at Parkway or 5-8 at Parkway? I mean, what really works with the facilities as well as the program? And so there's going to be quite a bit of autonomy with that. The plan is to, and you were going to hear this in a couple Mondays when we talk about and receive feedback from the parent meetings that the assistant superintendents have been having. But an example of that is that we plan to bring forth some initial information, what we're hearing from those merged sites, and then a specific plan for each one of those to the board. Again, unless there's a name change or something like that, those wouldn't necessarily come before the board for board action or for a vote, but more so for updated information. So that is not aligned to this particular time frame, Director Vice Chair Vu. And if we need to provide more clarification on the actual merge programs or the programs that are going to be repurposed on what a time frame looks like for them, we were planning to do that in 2 Mondays from now.
Thank you, Chief Turner.
Vice Chair, can I just add one more thing?
Sure. Director Cobb.
And this might be part of that upcoming presentation, but one thing I'm hearing as I'm listening to people in our neighborhoods and these schools is people are interested in what kind of specific transition supports will be available. I know it's going to be customized to each building's needs, but I think providing some clarity for people on what they can expect. Because I've said this before, I don't think people always know what they can ask for. And so I think it's really important we tell them, here's a list, here's a group of things. Do you want a restorative practices practitioner? Do you want a facilitator? Do you want transportation to visit communities, maybe especially merged ones? Money to pay for meals? Just really, I mean, it's not necessarily have to be an exhaustive list, but just I think giving people something to start from, because right now I think there feels like they're walking to the edge of the bridge and they don't see the rest of it to the other side. And I think it's up to us to paint that picture for people and then see what's missing. Like we can anticipate some things, but then we're going to hear from community that there's other things. And that's more and more as people are digesting this, and not everyone's accepting it. Some people are still angry. That's fair and fine. We need to think about how we are moving into that next phase, and that people need to hear that we are thinking about that too. People don't want to be left behind in this. There's already hurt. Our job should be to reduce hurt and harm going forward by anticipating needs and communicating that we are not going to leave schools behind. So I'd appreciate specificity there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Break. Chief Turner.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and break.
Thank you. Oh, you want to break? Okay.
At this time, we're going to take a break, a 10-minute break, and we will reconvene at, time is 5:54. We will reconvene at 6:04. Thank you.
6:05.
here that we have assembled Dr. Lori Erickson, Dr. Monica Potter, and Executive Director Brenda Natalia discuss the early childhood centers or hubs. They plan to provide information as to what was discovered in the work group, the findings there, and then share a little bit about our what we anticipate the hubs to include and view. And then they'll take any questions or comments that you have after they've completed. Dr. Erickson.
Good evening, Vice Chair Vu, members of the board, Superintendent Gothard. The early childhood leaders that are sitting at this table are honored to be here this evening. I hope you can see our smiles, and I'm seeing you smile back at us. We appreciate that. We are honored to be here this evening to present the SPPS Envision Workgroup findings. And I'm going to give you a bit of a warning in advance. A couple of months ago, I sat before you and I talked about the aggressive nature of our workgroup findings. They're coming, and they are amazing. The leaders at this table represent the departments who support families' first entry into the St. Paul Public Schools, the very first entry. The staff and the educators within our departments take pride in the fact that they are the start of the relationships with the St. Paul Public Schools. They understand their role and the gravity of their role in supporting healthy growth and development of our earliest learners and their families. The work of ensuring the SPPS achieves long-term outcome of improving kindergarten readiness begins at this table. Early childhood family education, early childhood special education, and the pre-kindergarten program. During our work group findings, one of our members compared us to a relay race. And that relay race is something that we are going to be using tonight as a metaphor. You're going to hear us and physically see us passing an imaginary baton between one another because of the seamless opportunities that our departments have with one another in support of our children and families in the city of St. Paul. So with that said, I hope you wore tennis shoes tonight. Lace them up because the race is about to begin. All right. So as we were preparing for this presentation, oh, I do see someone lacing up their shoes. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. As we were preparing for this presentation, it dawned on the leaders at this table that some of us have not had an opportunity to have a formal introduction to the new board members, which may mean that you do not know who we are or what we do. So we are going to take just a brief moment to introduce ourselves and the departments that we represent. And so I am going to officially hand the baton off to what I feel is the most untapped resource in the St. Paul Public Schools, and that is our early childhood family education program. Dr. Monica Potter.
Thank you, Dr. Erickson. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Erickson. Good evening. I'm Dr. Monica Potter. I am the supervisor of early childhood family education, which is called ECFE. ECFE is a parent education program. It's a program where two generations come together, parents and their children, for a learning experience. The parents in our program and children are birthed, so we have many beautiful babies, and it goes up to kindergarten. A little history about ECFE in St. Paul. Almost 50 years ago, St. Paul Public Schools was one of 6 pilot programs that began right here and has been continuing along. And currently, we have 10 sites. We serve about 1,200 families a year. And in addition to classes, we also do home visits with families. So what ECFE looks like is parents and their newborns, their infants come to join us, and they stay with us with their toddlers. And then they go on to a program right now that we have a wait list for, Practice for Pre-K for our 3-year-olds. And then often we pass the baton to pre-K for the families to continue. So we begin building relationships and support for the families and continue to nurture their growth and development until we pass everything off to kindergarten. And in addition to classes such as just infant and toddler classes, we also have family literacy classes that we have a wait list for right now as well. And we collaborate with adult basic education to support families in literacy skills. We have language-specific classes in Somali, Spanish, Hmong, and Karen. We have dad's classes. We have LGBTQ classes, online classes, and classes where we collaborate directly with early childhood special education. So we can give our families what they need and what they're asking for. So I'm going to hand the baton over to Executive Director of Special Education, Brenda Natalia.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing us to come and be here tonight. I'm Brenda Natala, Interim Executive Director of Specialized Services for St. Paul Schools, and I'm here to talk about early childhood special education in the district, and within the Office of Specialized Services is also nested wellness and early childhood screening. So ECSC, Early Childhood Special Education, serves over 1,000 families and children each year, ages birth to 5. We are everywhere the children are. So we provide home visits in the community. We go into private and public early learning centers, Head Start. We collaborate with ECFE. And then we have a very, very strong collaboration with pre-K, and where we're providing inclusive supports in every single pre-K classroom in the district. And then we also have 18 classrooms that are ECSE specialized classrooms. We're one of the only districts that has full-day classrooms for 4-year-olds that need a specialized program. We also have half-day classrooms for 3 and 4-year-olds. And I will pass the baton back to Assistant Director Dr. Erickson.
Good evening, I'm Lori Erickson. I'm the Assistant Director of the Office of Early Learning, and many of you equate me with the pre-K program, and I'm very proud of that. Our pre-K program is in 32 elementary schools across the district. Currently, we have 59 full-day pre-K classrooms, which is roughly 1,400 children in the St. Paul Public Schools. Our current wait list is 472 children. 472. In addition to that forward-facing pre-K program, we also have robust community engagement opportunities. Within our shop of the Office of Early Learning, we have something called STEPS, which is an initiative called Starting Transitions Early to Promote Success, as well as Early Learning Coalitions, which is a group of interested community members that rally around early learning and child well-being. And one of our board members is very active in one of our early learning coalitions. We're very proud of that. So with that said, the Early Childhood Work Group was approached by Chief Turner about 2 years ago, and she asked us to form a work group specific to Envision SPPS simply because we at this table, unlike a lot of parts in education, we are growing, and we are growing rapidly. And because of that, we are so new and just so brilliant to the district, we're the last ones in. And in many cases, we're outsizing ourselves within the school district. So in order to envision the SPPS Early Childhood Group, we were tasked with the statement that is on your slide. And I'm going to just take a moment to read it to you. The purpose of our work group was to determine and illustrate how underutilized elementary school buildings can be leveraged to create early childhood hubs encompassing early childhood family ed, early childhood special ed, and pre-K, as well as other early childhood related services to support early learners and their families in centralized locations. Now, with that said, the leaders at this table were members of the Envision work group. In addition, we had the program manager from Early Childhood Screening, Chimua. We had leaders from Head Start, Fraser Mental Health, which is one of our community partners, leaders from the Department of Education, and we also had a board member from the Minnesota Association for Family and Early Education. It was an absolutely dynamic, incredible group that was rallying around what was best for children and families in the St. Paul Public Schools. And as the leaders at the table were sitting and listening to some of the questions that you had for Chief Turner, much of what you are asking for is what we are going to be showing you tonight in terms of the work group findings. It is all about keeping children and families at the center and providing services that support them through the transitions of childhood. We couldn't be more pleased to bring this forward. So with that said, it was very interesting to have the non-SPPS work group members. When we were meeting, which started last winter and into the spring, we had 4 meetings throughout that time, and we spent a great deal of time poking holes into our structure. Who are you? How do you function? Why do you function that way? And because of that, there were 4 themes that emerged from the early childhood findings. And the first one was history. And in a moment, we are going to take just a brief history tour of our history in order for you to see the struggle that we're having because we're growing so rapidly. And with that in mind, again, our charge was to figure out how to leverage the underutilized buildings. So we spent some time figuring out where the children are and the impact of where they are in terms of programming. And then last but not least, we're going to dive into the unique needs that we'll need to have in order to have the early childhood hub model. So moving on to the history channel, as Dr. Wilcox Harris likes to say, each of us is going to take a moment to talk about the evolution of our programs. And to start off, the baton is officially being handed to Early Childhood Family Ed.
Our history in early childhood family education has been a lot of movement. In the last 20 years, ECFE has moved locations 27 times. When schools fill up, we're bumped out. Anything in the system that changes, usually we're moved to another spot. This is starting my 4th year, and we've had 5 moves in this time. So we're constantly moving, and that doesn't provide enough stability for our families. Our families are concerned when we have to move. Our children lose the consistency. And so that's one concern about our history, is how much movement we've had over the years.
Thank you. In early childhood special education, I was just sitting here reflecting. I started my career when I was having my second baby, and he's now 33. And that was the year that early intervention, birth to 3 early intervention, went to the schools in Minnesota. And that's when birth to 3 early intervention started, was 1988 or 89, right in that time. So we've been around for a while. But maybe in the history of St. Paul, it's not super long. And St. Paul in the 80s made a very deliberate commitment to early childhood special education and built the Rondo early childhood area with a beautiful playground, if you've seen it. And then Wheelock was another early childhood special ed center. Those had a clear identity as a school, and they were beloved by staff and families. However, they were all special education students. There was no opportunity for inclusion. So after that time, there were some small attempts to build some inclusive spaces here and there. But then about 2013, which is when I came to St. Paul, is when the decision had been made before me to break apart those special ed only sites, because we realized we were sending children from seclusion to seclusion. They weren't getting the opportunity for general ed rich curriculum. So we moved all of those ECSE classrooms into schools to align with pre-K. Since then they've had the pre-K curriculum, they've had the pre-K schedule, and we've been able to do some really meaningful collaboration and get most of our children into inclusive sites. At the same time, we collaborate with ECFE and Head Start for our 3-year-olds. We don't have enough 3-year-old programming. That's one of our main challenges that we have for our 3-year-olds. And we're really optimistic about the increased funding that is going to be coming. it's been wonderful to be in schools, but the challenge has been finding space as we continue to grow. Our enrollment has grown every year, and then we're saying, where can we put kids? And so we're getting spaces, hasn't been as planful and as far-reaching. So this Envision process really allows us to have a sustainable, identified space where families know I can go to this building and get my services, and I know my child can also go to ECFE, and I can also go to pre-K. Students that are screened and found to maybe be needing some more evaluation, that happens at the placement center often. And then a few years ago, they were having to go to 1780 West 7th for an evaluation, and then they're told, well, now you're going to go over to this school. So it's been a very confusing process for families to navigate through the many components of our early childhood special education program. So I am just thrilled that the dreams that we've had may soon come to fruition in reality in this Envision process. And I'll hand it back to Dr. Erickson.
And so for the pre-kindergarten program, when I entered into the building today, I went by the display that is in the hallway that honors the St. Paul Public Schools 150th anniversary, 150 years. The pre-kindergarten program started in the St. Paul Public Schools in 2005. We have only been here 16 years. That is it. So in comparison to the district, we are still in our infancy and we are growing. In 2005, when we began, our programs were known by the funding source. So you would hear community kindergarten, Project Early K, Early Reading First. That was us. And in 2005, we had a whopping total of 10 classrooms. 10. Fast forward to 2012, and you heard Executive Director Natala talk about how we were coming together. We were going over those programmatic hurdles in order to become that seamless transition. In 2012, we officially became known as the Office of Early Learning, the home of the pre-kindergarten program. And it's also important to note in 2012, Governor Mark Dayton was leading our state, and no one understood early childhood more than Governor Dayton. He had Arthur Reynolds, the researcher from the University of Minnesota, on his shoulder saying, every dollar that you invest in early childhood, you get $4 in return. He believed it and he put the money behind it. And since that time, pre-K enrollment, again, 10 sites to 59. That's incredible growth in 16 short years. And Dr. Gothard, I believe it was one of your very first days on the job. We were at the Capitol accepting close to $2 million in voluntary pre-K funding. And that voluntary pre-K funding, we are so grateful and so thankful. And here is what happened. That money came in August. We knew it was coming, but we did not know how much. Here it is, and it's a massive amount. We knew we had a wait list. We knew we were going to open classrooms. Where can they go? And because we are the last ones in, we get shoehorned into these little spaces, which makes it really challenging. So in partnership with the facilities department, we knew full well that we were going to start moving to the early childhood hub model. And because of that, we needed a density of programming. So we needed their support to identify that space. That space is now what you know as pre-K at Rondo. An unintended consequence of us moving into pre-K at Rondo was that we pushed out early childhood family education. And we did this at the very last minute, causing significant disruption to the families that were expecting that. Now they had to go to a complete different part of the building. We made it work. We smile. We're adaptive. We can do it. It's right for kids, but it's confusing. And to further that, and I want to show you yet another hurdle that happens when early childhood family ed moved to that part, the new part of the Rondo complex, they moved out early childhood screening. And that spoke to what Executive Director Natala was talking about. Now a family has to go to a complete another location for a service that should be right on site. Director Kopp, you talked about that warm handoff. This is all about transition. When the non-SPPS Envision members started to poke holes into our shops and how we function, they said, you can't do this. It doesn't make sense. You need to move to the hub model. And that hub model will provide what everyone calls the one-stop shop. So I'm going to ask for you, and you take a look at the slide. In the hub model, all of our shops are represented. Envision a family walking in, a stroller with an infant, a 2 or a 3-year-old by their side. Maybe they're grabbing their neighbor who has a 4-year-old, and they're coming into our building where the 4-year-old can go to pre-K. The 3-year-old can get early childhood screening on site, and the toddler and the mom or whomever can go to an early childhood family class on development, all in one location. Think about that warm handoff. Think about what that says to our families, our children, and the difference that it will make. That's incredible. The work group highly recommended the movement to the hub model. The leaders at this table, we know this. We've lived it. We see our neighboring districts do it. We believe in it. Last week, the leaders at this table had the opportunity to participate in Representative Dave Pinto's prenatal to age 3 forum. And it's a time for early learning leaders across the state to come together. We hear legislative updates. We hear the latest in research. The session last week was incredible. I took pictures as fast as I could of the slides that were being presented. It started with Senator Tina Smith talking about her push for the Build Back Better plan, which is going to include paid family leave, child care tax credits, universal pre-K. We're singing right now. Happy cheers here. Senator Smith handed it off to a researcher from the University of Minnesota who specializes in brain development. And she zoomed in on statewide data for early childhood specific to COVID and what has been happening during COVID. And I'm just going to read to you the data from the slide. Statewide, there was a 15% drop in early childhood special education services birth to 5. The need is still there. The children simply were not able to access the resource. Part C, and please, Executive Director Natala, if I'm saying this wrong, jump in. Part C, which is the birth to 3, age 3 component of early childhood special ed, there was a 20% drop in enrollment. The need is still there. The service simply was not taken advantage of. ECSE Part B, which is ages 3 through 5, saw a 12% drop in the state. I can speak to this next data point. There was a 12% drop in pre-K or school readiness program enrollments. Last school year, for the very first time, the pre-K program was under-enrolled. Unprecedented. There was a 9% drop in kindergarten enrollment, a 26% drop in early childhood screening, and a 30 to 35% drop in referrals to the Help Me Grow process. I'm bringing forward this data to you to drive home a point that children are there and they're waiting. As our state begins to open up and we finally can get on the other side of COVID, this is an opportunity for us to open our doors, welcome families, bring them in, provide the services on site to provide that seamless transition, to hand off that baton between all of our shops in order to get children ready for kindergarten. Director Broderick, you have asked why children are leaving. I'm going to invite the board to look at this as an opportunity to invite children and families in. When we provide the service on site, children will come, we will get them ready, provide the seamless transitions between our departments, and send them up to the big kid land of kindergarten, ready to go. So with that said, here comes some fun data. We now have established the history. We've talked to you about how we're hurdling over one another. The next step of the early childhood work group findings was, where are the children? And for the purpose of the work group, we zoomed in on 4-year-olds. And the reason being, when we build out the early childhood hub model, the first group that will go in will be the pre-kindergarten program. Okay? Now, the map is slightly askew, and it is slightly askew to help you understand the three-dimensional nature of the map. So if I can do this correct, I fully own the fact that I am an Apple person, so I'm touching a PC. So forgive me here. Up in this corner is area A. Here is area B. Oops, I already made a mistake. Area C, D. Okay, the mouse has gone away. E and F are on there as well. The green and the yellow of the map represent a low concentration of 4-year-olds in the city. There are 4-year-olds there, it is just simply a lower concentration. The red and the orange represent a high density of where 4-year-olds are living. Okay, now this next map, and this is incredibly critical. By our census data, there's roughly 4,000 4-year-olds in the city. We cannot accommodate 4,000 4-year-olds within our facilities portfolio. We simply don't have that room. We are honored to partner with early care and education sites across the city. They are critical in bringing this entire system together. The brown bars that you see on this map represent a parent-aware rated program. And for the good of the group, Parent Aware is the quality rating system that is used for early care and education sites across the state. The height of the bar represents the capacity of the early care and education site. So if the brown bar is high, it means there are a lot of seats available in that childcare. If the bar is low, it means that there is limited seating in that area. And I want to orient you on this map to areas E and F. There is a low density of children, yet there is a high density of quality care. Now I want you to zoom in, and if I could use the mouse, I would, so apologies there. Zone in on what is area C and part of A. High concentration of children and no concentration of early care and education. And for us at the table, that is what we call the child care desert. I want you to think about equity. The children that are in that child care desert deserve to have quality programming, and that's what we can bring to the table. That's where the 4-year-olds are. So again, I'm going to invite you to envision a family that is living in that desert. Imagine having an early childhood hub where they could come, have all of their services on site, have their needs met. I guarantee you they're going to fall in love with what we do. Dr. Potter mentioned the multi-generational programming in ECFE. Imagine getting that started from the beginning. You're going to notice that there are a couple other bullets that are on the hub offering menu. And here's that aggressive nature that I mentioned before. We envision having community partners such as mental health. WIC is women, infants, and children. Medical, dental. Imagine having all of that on site for our families. Imagine that easy transition. The concept of a learning lab is something that gives me absolute goosebumps. And Director Allen, last week you mentioned growing our own. One of the Envision work group members at one point in her career worked with Winona State University. And it was her charge to create a collaboration between Winona State, the area school district, Head Start, and the local early care and education sites. And they created a learning lab where the students at Winona State would take their courses, they would learn the content, and then go out into the field and put it into practice. I'm asking you to envision partnering with a local institution that has an early childhood family education licensure option, early childhood special education licensure option, a pre-K and licensure option. Having our paraprofessionals who are the best, they simply need the avenue to gain the license. Imagine going up the stairs or walking down the hall and taking a class from that university instructor, getting the content, going back into the classroom and putting it into action. Those are the staff members that will stay with us. We need this. And what's most important, we can do this. This can happen fall of 22. So with that said, pre-COVID, and here's the last bucket of the aggressive findings. Pre-COVID, the leaders at this table had the opportunity to go on field trips to our neighboring districts that have hubs. Our intent during those field trip excursions was to see what happens during the day. What does it look like? What does it feel like for children, for families in an early childhood hub environment? And with that said, I have two leaders next to me that have actually worked in early childhood hub settings. So I'm going to turn it over or hand that baton to Dr. Potter.
Thank you, Dr. Erickson. I came from a district that had an early education center. And the way our programs were able to work together, support one another, be vertically and horizontally aligned, do all of our PD together, I feel we were really strong in early childhood, in our policies and our procedures. And we were able to do co-collaboration. So from the staff's viewpoint, we were really strong from being in the center where we were all together and we knew one another. From the parents' perspective, they walked in and they were welcomed with joy, nurtured, supported from room to room. And there was an area, huge open area where parents could just come and they had time to talk with one another. There were beanbags set up and little spots where they could sit and read with their children until they were waiting for maybe an appointment with the parent educator. There were community spaces, there were special classes that came together, and if I had stayed in that position, some of the things that were in works that they wanted to accomplish is having cooking classes, having a family choir where parents and children were singing together. There are so many interesting community activities that we could do for our families as we nurture them along this journey. And I'm going to pass the baton on to you.
Thank you. When we did the tours we went, just about every one of our surrounding districts has had an early learning hub for some time, so it's been instructive to go and see those spaces. The biggest thing that stands out is that it's right-sized for little people. You walk in the bathroom and you don't need a stool for the sink for a child to fall off of because the sink is at the level that the child needs. One of the sites had a cafeteria where they put the kids could actually hold their trays instead of being like this when they went in the lunchroom. And just having a playground that's safe, that's right-sized, that's fenced, so you don't need to worry about taking little ones outside near a busy street. Having sensory spaces, having all of the adaptive equipment that might be needed for children, kind of just available and ready as needed. And I used to work in West St. Paul, and when I worked there 30 years ago, Birth to 3 team was in the back of the disused wing of the junior high because that's where Birth to 3 teams get put, right? Now in the hub, they're right in the middle. They're next to early childhood screening. They're next to early childhood family ed, and it's a team environment. And they can bring their families in for a family group, a family support group once a month and share the space. And it's an inviting, pretty place to be instead of bringing a family into the back end of a underused building. So it just really is a wonderful synergy to have a hub and the teaming that happens when people are together and they don't have to go across town to see each other. It's a wonderful opportunity.
And having said that, the very first site that we went to was an inner ring suburb that we compete with. I will acknowledge that. When we arrived, it was right at the time that programming started. The seamless parking, the seamless drop-off was amazing, But what was the most incredible is when you walked into that building, all of the families were gathered with one another, and the children were gathered with one another. It was joyful, truly joyful. That's what an early childhood hub can bring to the St. Paul Public Schools. When we do this right at the beginning, we'll see the payoff in the end. And so with that in mind, I do want to offer the board and the community a vision of what can happen with early childhood landscape. We are growing, and we will continue to grow. I've said it as many times as I can, and I'm sure there are people saying, really? She's going to say it again. Universal pre-K, it is not if, it is when. Our leaders in Washington have set the October 31st deadline for the Build Back Better plan. That is 6 days from now. When that plan happens, the universal pre-K landscape for the St. Paul Public Schools is going to change dramatically. Our facilities are going to need to be ready to welcome 3 and 4-year-old children and their families. You cannot have early learning without the families. Early childhood special education continues to grow. The data that I put forward just a bit ago, the children are there, they are coming. And I can tell you in our pre-K classrooms right now, we're seeing that full on. So with that in mind, I'm guessing this is Karma. You have been asking for a picture. Paint a picture for us so we can see what this can look like. 2 buildings have been identified as potential early childhood hubs if the Envision SPPS plan goes forward. The Galtier building is where I'm going to start. The pre-K at Rondo program was always designed to be the first attempt at an early childhood hub. When the plan is approved, the pre-K at Rondo classrooms will move into the Galtier building. If you were to go to pre-K at Rondo right now, you will see a very close partnership with the Fraser Mental Health. We have a day treatment and a family therapy area. They are closely aligned. That will move with the pre-K at Rondo program. We are looking at the impacted sites. Obama has been named as an impacted site. There are 2 pre-K classrooms at Obama that would move into Galtier. Why would they move? I'm looking at the geography of it. And I'm going to take you back to this slide briefly. If I could figure out how to get the pointer to work, I would. Galtier is in the middle of that yellow and green area where there is a high density of early care and education sites. Knowing that pre-K programming will be the first group in to this hub model, we do not want it to become a pre-K school. That is not our intent. We have to learn from the mistakes that we've made with our history. We are stronger when we start from the ground up, from the beginning. The base will be the pre-K programming. Then we need to look at what's happening in the community. We have strong ECE partners in that area. So what makes sense to bring in to this hub model? Is it partnering with the Hamlin ECFE programming, having Hamlin be the birth to 3, where it hands off to a 4-year-old ECFE programming at the Galtier building. Then it goes to the pre-K program, and then we hand it up to the big kid land of their community school. That's a picture. Perhaps the Galtier building, and I keep looking at it because there is a second level, could this be the building where we build out the learning lab? Right down the street from Galtier Elementary is a Head Start program. Could we partner with them? Is this the building? Could we use the Learning Lab to partner with the Head Start staff and provide professional development? All of these are possibilities. Now, I'm going to orient you back to that childcare desert. The LNFI, or the L'Etoile Lower building, is in the upper portion of that desert. It has been identified as a potential hub. We would look at the schools that are having the impact, move the pre-kindergarten programming. The LNFI lower building is already little people friendly. It is lovely. It is 1 level. If I look at that desert, my brain goes to 3-year-old programming. Head Start is primed and ready to do 3-year-old programming. So Perhaps this is the opportunity to look at WheeLock, which has a vibrant early childhood family ed program. Look at this, look at the WheeLock building as the beginning, the birth to 3 component, where you would see early childhood special ed, early childhood family ed. They would pass the baton onto the LNFI building, where they would have potentially Head Start and our 4-year-old programming. And then we pass the baton up to their community school for kindergarten. Now, this plan sounds great to us. We need the community input. We need family input. That is our next step. So I'm going to go to the very last slide and just do a quick recap. Our next step, when the vote happens, the building is identified. We then engage the community to build out the programming, and we will have programming ready by the fall of 2022. Will it be the complete programming? Absolutely not. We cannot get everything pulled off overnight, but we're going to do the building process in partnership with community feedback to build that out. So with that said, I'm going to open it up to any questions you might have.
Questions by board members?
I have a couple of questions.
Dr. Creo.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Vu. Thank you for the presentation and for the effort to create a vision to help us see what you intend or how you intend to program these sites. How many pre-K, and I specifically say pre-K, not the younger kids, how many pre-K classrooms are you expecting to have at, for example, Gaultier or LNFI lower?
That's a great question. Through the Vice Chair, Director Creo, at this point in time, I'm hesitant to answer it because of the October 31st deadline with the Build Back Better plan. When, not if, but when that plan happens, the entire landscape will change. As I said, we are growing. When universal pre-K comes in, we may need more buildings. We may need more space. So that is why I'm slightly hesitant to answer that question.
Okay, and and this might not be a question for this team to answer, but it may be more of a question for other district policies. The understanding of how the enrollment flows from at specific sites from pre-K to kinder. We can see we capture a lot of students at a specific site. If we have a hub that then goes out to to community schools, is there potential for losing those kids? Do we want to actually say, should all go to this school or to these schools? It's just a question, are we going to automate enrollment so we can capture all the kids?
Through Vice Chair Vu, Director Creo, we've been watching that closely with pre-K at Rondo. And I'm going to fully acknowledge that during distance learning and COVID, we've somewhat put that data aside simply because last year we were under-enrolled in pre-K and families they've moved rapidly. So it is what it is. Pre-COVID, we had the very first year of pre-K at Rondo, we had 99% of the children going off to their community school. Incredible. And that was because of intentional transition events that we held throughout the year. Since that time, and it is a short period of time, we've captured roughly 80% of the pre-K at Rondo children to their community schools.
Yeah.
So through the chair, I might want to just add a technical piece that we add to make sure that happens is that families receive notification that they have a guaranteed seat at X school, which is their community school. So they actually don't have to even apply for kindergarten.
Perfect. A follow-up to that, which is immersion schools may have pre-K programs that offer language at the pre-K level. Are we thinking of continuing those? I'm speaking specifically about L'Etoile du Nord because they're, moving away from that little kid site. I just want to find out what your plan is for that.
Through Vice Chair Vu, Director Creel, I cannot stress enough how much we believe in early learning around immersion programming. Last week we put forward the IGDI grant work. It is who we are and what we believe. when you dig into the work group findings, and granted they were findings, it was our recommendation that the immersion sites would maintain their pre-K programs simply because you cannot replicate that full immersion under a hub model. So if I am a family at LNFI, as of today, in terms of the capacity, the pre-K classrooms can fit at that upper campus. As you've heard, we move often. We are very nimble. If the K-5 enrollment at LNFI begins to grow, that pre-K would then move under the hub model. And that's something we would bring back up into discussion.
Thank you.
Any other questions by board members? Dr. Allen?
Me? Okay. That slide was real impressive about the number of 4-year-olds we have in the city, except for that those young people are going to be kindergartners by the time this goes down. And with our enrollment declining, and one of the reasons being less children being born in the city or birth rates, what is our anticipation, or can we get a map of the 2-year-olds that are born in the city of St. Paul?
I'm tripping over this, forgive me. Through the vice chair, Director Allen, absolutely. Again, for the purpose of this report, we wanted to find out where the 4-year-olds are, because those would be the first children going into the hub. Absolutely, we can go back and take a broader look. And you are correct that this is a point in time, and the data is only as good as that point in time. However, I do view what we are trying to put forward to you as an enrollment strategy. The folks at this table, the early childhood leaders, it makes our heart hurt that we talk in that manner because there are children there. However, it is an enrollment strategy. And if we do this right from the beginning, they are going to stay with us. In the pre-K program, we capture about 14, as I'm saying, that capture is probably not the right word. We serve 1,400 children within the program. That means there's close to 2,000 other children out there. We can support more. We simply don't have the capacity within our site.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Dr. Kopp?
This just made me like immeasurably happy, just being a huge fan of the Office of Early Learning. And I did want to just highlight something that the office does. It's not 100% related to this, but the team in Office of Early Learning works with child care providers who aren't affiliated with the schools in any way in order to help, and if I get this wrong, correct me, but to help align kind of curriculum or preparedness so that when they enter our pre-K, they are ready to benefit from the wonders of pre-K. And so that's the kind of outreach and things that Office of Early Learning is doing in building out those community connections, because learning happens in schools, but it also happens in homes and in other places and child care centers. And so I think that's an important part when we're thinking of this partnership that's really including a lot of people. So I have just a couple quick questions. I love this idea. I think it makes a lot of sense to make things easier for families when we're talking about assessments. I know I've heard from folks in early learning about the challenge of getting young people assessed and reaching out to families and thinking of ways to make that easier. So small or large challenges that a young person might have can be addressed quickly before they experience those difficulties in the school setting. And that it's a supportive, voluntary environment with families. And so families have all the information they need to make good decisions. And housing that together with screening, with dental, medical, thinking even city, county resources, things that help families. Like there's just we could all sit up here and list all the things that we know that help families be strong and successful. And when families are doing that, then children are. When families are healthy and supported, children are healthy and supported. And so I hope that's part of the thinking, is just like who wants in, like who wants an office here, and making that happen. One thing that I do hear in kind of early learning, I went through ECFE and I loved it. And I've heard from people who are like, ECFE, not totally my structure. It's not like my jam. That's not the thing I want to do. What opportunities might be available in a hub to explore some different models of early learning engagement for families who maybe want that supportive community, but maybe the model itself is not quite the right fit? Do we have some opportunity for that?
Through the chair, Vice Chair Vu and Director Kopp, with an early learning center, we can have all kinds of exciting programs, and the programs can bring families in. And so whatever we dream of, we can accomplish. So I feel like we're all together, we can spread the word easier. And for ECFE right now, we get a hold of the birth lists from Ramsey County. We send postcards out to all families. We're in the community. We're at parks. We're at WIC. We've been at the Student Placement Center. We're at homeless shelters. So we're all in the community pulling families to have them come join us. So it gives us more opportunities because people and families all have different needs depending on their parents and the children. Like this last year during the pandemic, there's a single parent that was really struggling. She took 4 online classes and wrote us thank you notes of pages after pages saying how that helped her through the pandemic. So we want to first and foremost always be looking at what do our families need, what do they want, and how do we create something different for their needs. Thank you.
And in alignment with that, pre-K at Rondo during its very first year, when we met families, we had an ice cream social. And it was amazing. Families just came in droves. And the exit ticket was a menu of opportunities. Here are things that we can offer. What would you like to do? Mm-hmm. And if there's something that isn't on here, what is it? And we took that data to build out the family engagement opportunities for that school year, and that has continued on.
Thank you. That's obviously wonderful to hear. And we think about if we have families that feel welcomed and that they have a say in how things can go and what they need, that builds trust at an early age with their young, I was a parent who got the little card and I was like, oh, I'm so happy I can meet other people with babies because there's no one around me with babies. And it's like, it can be a really isolating, experience. And so to be able to be welcomed into a community and then also to say, I don't see exactly what I need here, but there's an opportunity to co-create that. And then I love the description of how we gently kind of guide students to that next phase. And when we talk about building enrollment in our school communities, this is a way we do that. Sometimes we see families go from ECFE to pre-K to the elementary school when they're together because a place becomes familiar. There's a group of trusted professionals and family, other families you meet that you become very close to people. I have friends from ECFE, like our kids aren't necessarily friends anymore, but we are, that happens. Kids grow apart, but like as adults, you really get bonded together in those times when you're, the joys and challenges. Anyone who's ever done that knows what that's all about. So I'm happy to hear that these can be really dynamic, reflective spaces, that they're not static. It's not like this is the programming, it ends here, we never change. I like to hear that it can continue to evolve to meet the needs of families and to be also a center of joyful gathering in communities, because we need more of that. We need more spaces like that. So thank you. It's hard not to gush more. It's really just wonderful to see this. And I'm just a big believer in getting it right at the beginning, getting it as right as we can get with all hands on deck, with families involved from the beginning, that they feel welcomed and empowered to support their children in the way they want to. So thank you for this presentation. This is a really beautiful vision.
Dr. Ellis?
So I just wanted to ask, because you mentioned immersion Director Carrillo mentioned immersion, and so I'm just curious what the impact would be on our Montessoris because they have pre-K at their buildings and at their sites too.
I'm going to get this correct this time through the vice chair, Director Ellis. The work group Envision recommended that the Montessori stay with the Montessoris.
Okay.
The unique programming nature cannot be replicated, therefore it needs to stay in the building that it is already living in. Montessori would stay with Montessori, immersion would stay with immersion.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask, when we're talking about the citywide 3K initiative, what's the difference between 3 and the 4? And is there a difference? I feel you getting excited, but I'm not.
And I'm looking to, Dr. Gothard can answer this question.
Yeah, through the vice chair, Director Ellis, it is, I don't know if I can be as excited as Dr. Erickson, but I'll try my best. I think one of the very first meetings, other than the one that was referenced that I attended when I arrived here, was to start talking about a vision for early learning for the future. And it's where some of this work for Universal 3 and 4K came out of. And we're at a position right now where, as a citywide work group, we're bringing together some pretty strong recommendations for what that future might be. The Build Better Back plan is only going to help that. But what I want to share with our community is there is an engaged and committed group already working to do this, to expand opportunities. And I think of all the things we have. I mean, this city, we're sitting in a place where every child born has $50 in a college savings account. To me, this is a way for us to start at birth and truly organize ourselves in a way that doesn't allow children and families to slip between the cracks. And it really is a chance for us to re-envision what those early experiences look like. As somebody asked, I think it was Director Kopp, I don't know who it was, about kindergarten. Maybe it was Director Allen. What happens to those little ones? I'm writing myself a whole bunch of notes right here in terms of what can we do as a kindergarten retention strategy. Once we have students in families in our programs, and there's a lot of different ideas. Here's one example, and they probably already do it. Their heads will probably nod, but bus trips around the city to the schools. And you get a few things out of it. You get bus safety. You get these buses aren't that scary, and you get to see the places. So for us to find ways to coordinate that and to only strengthen what those opportunities are, this is a chance for us to share with our district more than sitting at the board dais or on print material. This is a chance for an experiential opportunity, for us, our staff, and our families.
The superintendent didn't answer my question, the difference between 3 and 3.
So I am going to get this right. Through the vice chair, Director Ellis, Councilmember Rebecca Naher was the owner or the real initiator of the 3K work. And the intent of 3K, which now is going to be known as Spark, is St. Paul Already for K, which will impact 3 and 4-year-old children. From my understanding, it is going to be a scaled-in model. It will start with 4s and then move its way down to 3s. Okay? From what I am reading and hearing about the Build Back plan, say that really quickly, is that it is 3 and 4-year-old programming. Okay. And the most important, or what I'm most excited about the Build Back Better plan is that it recognizes when you do something to the 3s and 4s, the unintended consequence or the dropping of the baton is our infant to toddler. And there is a component in the Build Back Better plan for infant through toddler programming, and I couldn't be more pleased. It is clearly looking at sharing that baton through all of the stages of early learning.
And one thing, members of the board, that I'll add as well, thank you, Dr. Erickson, is that you heard the numbers, 59 pre-K classrooms right now. Birth cohorts around 4,000. You start to do the math there and think of, wait a minute, 8,000 3 and 4-year-olds? Where are we going to put them? And this is the really big and important piece of we are going to need space, but even more importantly, we're going to need coordination of providers as well. There's no way we can do this alone right now anyway, or even in the next 5 to 10 years. But we have to come up with ways to partner with our community. And you all know about the workforce shortages that we have right now. This is yet one more opportunity for us to engage with our community to bring them in and underneath that early learning umbrella. Perhaps we create our own certification programs with an institution, and we do it right here. So we have to get really creative if we truly want to make this as meaningful as it potentially could be.
Thank you. You mentioned that there's 472 students on the wait list. And so, like, how much does that wait list shift, or does it stay sort of that number throughout the year?
Director Williams. Through the Vice Chair, Director Ellis, I did get it correct this time. That waitlist number is always in influx. Chief Turner, in the August school readiness report, brought forward to that for the very first time our pre-K program was fully enrolled. When families apply and they're accepted in May, they don't always show up in August and September. And so we have had children throughout the school year that have dropped. And when children drop, our school sites immediately reach over to our amazing student placement center, and children are moved off of that wait list. So it does fluctuate throughout the year.
Okay, and then I just had one more question. I just need to find it. Oh, you talked about potentially where the program at Rondo would move, that it would potentially move to Gaultier. And then you mentioned the Fraser Day treatment would move as well. And you also talked about a learning lab. You mentioned the learning lab, but you didn't really actually say what exactly. The learning lab is just where you're having students coming in and learning who are trying to get their license. Is that what the learning lab is?
Correct.
Okay.
Through Vice Chair and Director Ellis, it speaks to what Dr. Gothard was just mentioning. It's an opportunity for us to be really creative and think about how we can build the early childhood workforce. I know in pre-K, it is a unique license to gain access to. And we're constantly looking, and I know for me, I am in the colleges saying, hey, think about St. Paul Public Schools. From early childhood family education, there's only, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe there's only one university in the state that is providing that license. It is an untapped resource that we have to capitalize on, and we have the ability to do so in St. Paul.
Okay, and then my other question is, so then what do we imagine would happen if you moved from Rondo? Like you said, that was one of the original sites, and so then what would happen to that site? I would kind of hope that that one would stay, and then you just build, but you're saying that's not the vision.
Correct. Through the Vice Chair, Director Ellis, I'm very happy to say that would then be handed off to the Facilities Department to do an analysis of what makes sense to go into that building. And again, just to be clear, that pre-K at Rondo program was always designed to be the first move, the first early childhood hub. That was always the intent.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Bowdick?
Yes, thank you very much. And a couple things that Dr. Gothard said and then that Director Ellis said made me think of a couple questions. Do we have the data over the last, let's say, 10 years of the retention rate for our early childhood programs, and that those kids do continue on in St. Paul in kindergarten?
Through Vice Chair Director Broderick, we do have the data for the pre-kindergarten program. We have data that shows the percentage of children that stay within the district and the percentage of children that stay within that particular site. And when I look at specifically at the site, it ranges everywhere from 30% to 80%. And the district average of children in pre-K staying within the St. Paul Public Schools is right around 70%. And full disclosure, I have not looked at that data during COVID and distance learning. It's just not clean or accurate data.
And so therefore, with that data, do we also have data or information which would indicate why certain families choose to continue on with SPPS and some do not? And then, of course, as Director Ellis asked about the waiting list, it'd be interesting for me to know whether families that are on a waiting list and never do get an opportunity to participate in one of our early childhood programs, whether we lose them then, or do we not lose them? I guess I'm looking for, once again, the question that some of you folks may think I'm a broken record, but why do we lose kids at any level in St. Paul Public Schools? But why in particular do we lose some kids between early childhood and kindergarten? Because in my book, we're the best game in town, and they all should stay with us. Could you respond to that, please?
Absolutely. Through the Vice Chair, Director Broderick, I agree we are the best. I agree with you completely. Having said that, what is unique about the pre-kindergarten program, we're in 32 schools. We're not in every school. So naturally, we're going to have children that are accepted into a pre-K whose community school does not have a pre-K program. Okay, so for example, Galtier Elementary has pre-K, and many of those children would go to Adams for kindergarten. They did not have a pre-K program at Adams. I saw children from Wellstone, children from Riverview that were in the immersion program for pre-K that would go to Adams for kindergarten. Guess what we opened at Adams this school year? Pre-K. We did that intentionally. So we're naturally seeing some of those moves along the way. Going back to 2016, we were noticing that our full-day sites had a wait list from here to Minneapolis. Our half-days, some were full, the majority were empty. So we made the commitment as a district to slow and steady move to full-day pre-K programming. We were using our data, and I know this was a hard sell because when we moved to full-day, we lost seats. However, we invested in instructional time, and the data was showing that the children that were in our full-day pre-K had better attendance, which means stronger achievement, and they were much more likely to stay in that particular school for kindergarten. And St. Paul Music Academy is my poster child for that. My very first year there, I was coaching at SPMA, and we had half-day pre-K. And it was really low. It was right around 25% of the pre-K children would stay for kindergarten. And when we made the move to full-day pre-K, 80% of those children stayed for kindergarten. 80%. Now, what is happening around us? We were, at one point in time, we were the only pre-K in town. And everybody came to us because we were the thing. With the explosion of funding, that has happened everywhere. And as Dr. Gothard has alluded to, we need our early care and education partners. They have access to that money as well. And so many of our families are choosing different options because it matches their need. Of the 400 children that are on our wait list, we do offer a summer program, and we target the children that are on our wait list. So we're pulling kids from that wait list first before we open it up to our current group of kids. That is one way we're addressing it. We are partnering with Head Start. We do acknowledge that if we are full, they may have open seats. Let's share, let's get this going because it is all in the good of the community. So we are trying.
Thank you very much for that district history and for your own personal input in terms of your experience. And, I came on the board in 2001, or actually in 2002, but in the year 2000, I worked on the referendum with the St. Paul Federation of Education. And as an old, primarily 12th grade social studies teacher, I got a real crash course on two things: the importance of ECFE and all of our early childhood programs, which I understood even as a 12th grade teacher. But I also understood the importance of having the ECFE community, particularly the parents, on board as St. Paul Public School supporters. We would not have won that first referendum in the year 2000, and then the next subsequent 4 referendums that we've won without the support of EFCE. So this old social studies teacher hockey coach really learned what ECFE was all about way back then, before I even ran for the school board. But I guess giving you this whole little history of Johnny Broderick doesn't prove much, except that what it made me understand was that there is a connection between our efforts with the early child, with the kids, the little kids, in terms of us having more success achievement-wise with the older kids that I taught, but also the connection between that and enrollment. And would either one of you three like to talk a little bit about how we can, even now with these, particularly potentially with these hubs, how we can have this important part of our total school district, ECFE, contribute to us overcoming this problem we've had in recent years. And it's a problem that I'm not afraid to say, although I'm sad to say, of declining enrollment. What's the role that you ladies and your colleagues in ECFE can play in terms of increasing enrollment? Because that's why we're talking tonight. And you folks knew you were going to hear another speech from me, so sorry.
I'd like to respond to that through the chair, Chair Vu, and Director Broderick. I envision early childhood hubs. And when I think about the hubs, the first word that comes into my brain is nurturing. We are caring for families, we are nurturing them. The pre-K programs are nurturing the parents and the children, ECFEs nurturing the parents and the children, and ECSE. So you are welcomed and enveloped into this community of learners. And we grab a hold of you when you have your baby, and we hold you tight. We co-regulate together. We hold you tight through your toddler years, your 3 years, the 4 years, and there's a natural progression, passing the baton once again. And when we can together, all of us as a team, support parents to have screening, help them find resources in the community, food, you name it, we're building such strong relationships. And together, we can support those relationships going forward to kindergarten. It's all about really building a strong relationship together.
And adding on to that, I do think using the data from the map and the partners that we have and recognizing where the children are and where there's that gap or that childcare desert, that is prime opportunity for us as a system to say there's an equity issue here. They don't have access to things that they may need. Let's go there. And the synergy that can happen because of that is an enrollment strategy. And when we do this right from birth, they're going to stay with us through kindergarten. And what I feel a tremendous responsibility for, especially at pre-K at Rondo, because we are a little bit over here, we have to engage with the families right away. Your community school is, did you know you already have a spot in kindergarten at? And ensure that that family is fully aware of what that next step is. Did you know that the open house at your community school is? The kindergarten teachers' names are, and really push that for the family support.
I wanted to add something if I could too, through the chair, Director Broderick. We have about 100 staff who provide services in homes and community. We're really good at going into the community and providing service. Those families may never even need to set foot inside of a St. Paul school. Now, during COVID, we've had more families come in because of the safety of home visits during COVID, which has been an opportunity to bring families in. I think having a hub will allow us a much more natural, inviting environment to bring families in while they're getting birth to 3 services in the home. If we have inviting, welcoming spaces where staff feel like they have a space to bring families, because right now those staff are all at 271 Belvedere, which is kind of far away from kind of the core. When you saw where the children are, to ask a family to go all the way over there may not feel as welcoming as to say, we've got an early learning hub in your neighborhood. Why don't we meet there this week? And you're going to get familiar and comfortable with coming into a St. Paul school. And then from there, we can bridge into, let's talk about kindergarten. Because there are families in our community, I know, that feel like, I don't want to go to a St. Paul school. I'm not even thinking about it. I've talked to neighbors like that, and we need to change that narrative by bringing them in any opportunity we have.
Thank you very much.
I have to put in one more detail. I own it. I'm getting text messages from folks, and one of them is from Gina Haas, who was the program manager, the original program manager for pre-K at Rondo. And when we opened that site, it was late. It was August, and we were scrambling. And many of the families said, yay, I get a spot, but oh, it's at pre-K at Rondo, because they wanted a different school. And during that school year, they fell in love with what that program was. And we have data from the families, anecdotal data saying this was the best experience because. This was the best experience because. And we've held on to that and built off of that to truly build that nurturing, safe environment and that welcoming entry from the beginning.
Well, when the ECFE director back in 2000, Mary Dooley Burns, said to me, we're going to win this referendum, don't worry. She made sure that it happened because she had you folks with her. Thank you.
Can I add one last piece here through the chair and Director Broderick? Is that the point that you just made about the parents, is it better to try and engage parents for high schoolers? Or do we start at the beginning, bringing all the parents into the community and building from there? You know, it's starting at the beginning, and the focus, we can't lose focus on the parents, because the parents are as big a part of early childhood as their children. So thank you.
Thank you once again.
Any other questions by board members? I did have a question on slide 18. It doesn't escape me that a lot of the concentrated areas where there are opportunities for 4-year-olds or younger are in communities of color. In addition to that, likely communities of color who speak English as a second language. And this question is for Monica Potter and Brenda and Natalia. So we want to grow these hubs. In what ways are we supporting our families of color and speak English as a second language right now that have proven to work, and take that to the hub model and grow that and adapt it? Because to me, these are the populations that are growing. This is where the opportunity is at.
Through the chair, Vu, we have a sort of hub at Wheelock right now. And at Wheelock, we team with ECSE for classes, and all of our Corinne classes are there. We've got about 7 Corinne classes, so we're in the community. We still provide transportation for parents that need it, but we're a hub there supporting parents. Now, what we have discovered is for our families, the family literacy program, parents wanted to come more than one day. So now we're offering 2 days of family literacy, so there's more time for them. And as we go forward and parents ask for more needs, maybe we have 3 days of the family literacy program. So some of our locations already are on the east and the northeast side already. So this would be a situation where we'd have early childhood hubs, and then we would add more where they're needed. And we'd have hubs, and we'd also have satellites at schools for all diverse needs.
Thank you.
That's it.
Vice Chair Vu, in ECSE, we have a wonderful team of interpreters that accompany our providers on home visits. We have A few bilingual staff. I wish we had more, but that's growing. And we also offer family support groups. During COVID, we were able to offer more virtual groups, and we've had really good success with our Karen family support group in particular. That's something that we always are looking to grow as well. And I agree that this is a tremendous opportunity for our families to have more support. I think we do a good job supporting families in their home language, but to have an identity or a space, I think is really empowering for those families.
Thank you. I just want to reflect back a little bit about my experience with early childhood special education and ECFE. When I was first going through those programs with my children, I really didn't understand the necessity of the program and how important it was for my children, so I had to learn about it. And oftentimes when I learned about it, sometimes it felt like this information is what's good for you. But then I would come back and say, well, wait a minute, we need to sort of change it up in this way because it kind of works better for my family, and because this is how my people sort of understand early childhood as we are growing. So I just want to emphasize that as much as we want to devise or create a system to capture or net as many children as we can, we also have to think about the quality of it and who we're serving, and let that opportunity build as we're building these hubs, because these are families that are trying to figure out how early childhood and how special education during those points of that child's life works for them. I think if we focus a little bit more on the quality, we can sustain this program for the long haul.
Thank you, members of the board, Vice Chair Wu, and thank you to our team of experts, panelists. This team really did lead the work around the early childhood work group, and so I just wanted to thank you all. You're welcome to remain at the dais or return to your seats. We're just going to close out. Vice Chair Wu.
Thank you.
With kind of next steps, which we are doing around engagement. I did want to share I wanted to at least provide you answer to your question around the Title I. With all of the sites that were impacted, there are 3 of the sites that are impacted that do not receive Title I services. Otherwise, all the other ones do. So those 3 sites are Latour du Nord, so that would be LNFI Lower, Capitol Hill, and the change there is that the pathway guarantee into Highland is changing. So the other impact school that's not Title I would be Highland High School. So again, it's Highland High School, Capitol Hill, and LNFI. Otherwise, the other sites that are being recommended or proposed that have a change, whether the change is merge or close, regardless if it's a school that's being impacted or the one that's being merged with, those are the sites that we looked at.
Chief Turner, correction, it's J.J. Hill.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. So, Chief Sherrill, can you repeat all 3 then again?
Correct. Is J.J. Hill, Highland Senior, and LNFI.
So erase Capitol Hill from that then.
Through the chair, to Chief Turner, those 3 that you just mentioned, and I'm hearing also Capitol Hill, so 4. So it would also be Capitol Hill.
The sites, so let me just repeat. The sites that are not receiving title are not receiving title. I think the question was what of the sites, impacted sites, are Title I sites. So all of them are, with the exception of Highland High School, J.J. Hill, Capitol Hill, and LNFI. And I wanted to, which we will bring forth next time, just to verify. There were some additional sites that, when we went through the map that we discussed, are magnet versus not. So I wanted to bring forth that complete list and just provide that right into the board and the community for next time. As we look at our engagement sites, engagement information, and how we are planning to work with the public, wanted to be able to just reiterate the things that are coming up and the format in which those sessions are going to go. And so the first one that we talked about, which actually our first one is tomorrow night, are the public information sessions. These sessions, again, it's to provide the public with objective information, so basically factual information. We want to make sure that community understands what's actually being recommended. So those will start with a narrated video, really of just the changes. It's going to walk families and stakeholders through the map and what is going to be recommended in each area. And again, the audience on that is actual parents and stakeholders. That is virtual. And then we will be using a narrated Q&A format. So similar to the format that we use with the return to school, safely return to school. So those two dates are October 26th and November 8th. Those are 6 to 7:30, scheduled for 6 to 7:30. The bilingual sessions will be the same format, but they will just be done in the native language, and you can see which days those are. There will be a panel list of core team members that will be able to answer questions in real time. So similar as we did with Safely Return to School sessions, families will be able to watch in real time the actual meeting, and then be able to submit their questions via the chat feature on the platform. And there will be people within the communications department, Office of Family Engagement, people on the core team that will be monitoring those questions and answering them in real time. So again, it will be a moderated discussion. Questions will be gathered, and then panelists of members, including from facilities, finance, the core team, assistant superintendents, and others, will be able to answer those questions as they come in.
Chair, could I ask a question right now, please?
Chief, are you finished?
It's about these informational sessions. I'm just
go ahead, Ron. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm just anticipating. Oh, thank you, Chair. I'm just anticipating as I look at the format, and then we look to go to the question and answer. It's very reminiscent of I think the wonderful fireside chats that Dr. Gothard had with our families during the pandemic. And although I think I'm already anticipating that there will be people who won't get a chance to ask their questions, and will they have the option of submitting those questions? Or I think Dr. Gothard worked this all out with the pandemic sessions, but I'm just concerned about people saying, I didn't get a chance to ask my question, or worst case scenario would be that I had a question and I want to submit it, and how soon am I going to get an answer?
To the Vice Chair, Director Broderick. So yes, a couple things to answer your question. One, we will, if we run out of time, we will continue to receive questions via the Envision SPPS website and through that email. That is an active email and being monitored in real time, and that is being coordinated. So if a question comes up about placement that is being referred to Director Williams, she answers that, and then the information goes directly back to the stakeholder who asked that particular question. So those questions are being, and we have committed to answering those, I believe within 48 hours, the answer to the questions. Similarly, if we get a very specific question on the call tomorrow, we're likely going to ask parents that, take offline, as we don't like to talk about very specific students and get your address and names and student ID, that kind of information. We would prefer that we handle that offline and that they call and work directly with student placement or work directly with an assistant superintendent or something like that. So there may be some questions that we do ask parents that we'll take those offline. But it is our goal to answer as many questions as possible on those nights.
Thank you very much for thinking ahead on all of that. And then, of course, then what will happen, of course, well, two questions on the front end. Do we feel pretty confident? This first one's going to be tomorrow, and 6 o'clock, right, virtual?
Through the Vice Chair, yes.
Okay, so I'll be at my computer watching and listening.
Yes, through the Chair, Vice Chair, board members will be at their computer watching, and the information sessions are not intended to be a dialogue with the board members. It's meant to be a question and answer with administration specifically about the plan of the program.
My personal thoughts would be that I would simply be listening, put my computer on mute because I don't, but would that be good advice for all of us on the board to try our best to listen and watch those virtual sessions, the one beginning tomorrow?
Through the Vice Chair, yes, that would be my suggestion, that you listen.
And just the fact that we're online, so to speak, and listening passively, this does not violate any, I already see legal counsel shaking his head. We're okay on this one, Council Long?
Through the Vice Chair, Director Broderick, anytime that there's a quorum of the board together, even on a virtual meeting, there's a potential open meeting law issue. Even though if the board is not actively engaged, by definition, a meeting is any time the board is even receiving information upon which it may make a decision. So that's something we should discuss in terms of the potential of a quorum and the open meeting law issues that would surround that.
Okay, and I don't want to turn this into a legal discussion, but I'm still very anxious for all of us to be able to see and hear tomorrow night and the following virtual sessions in real time as much as possible. And I'm hoping that we can do that.
If I could clear one thing up through the Vice Chair, Director Broderick, tomorrow night is an administrative meeting that is going to be online. Board members won't have the link. You'll be watching the live stream. So very different than you being invited to a meeting. We're invited to the meeting. You'll be watching it just as parents might be around the district.
So then in essence, we are not really attending the meeting, we're just watching it. Would you say that's I know as our attorney, you...
Because we're not in a forum if we're not together. We're not in a meeting, we're not together.
Well, that's something we'll have to look at and work out between now and then.
Okay, and
excuse me, Vice Chair, Director Broderick, that's something that we...
Yes, because I think our public would want us to be listening and watching, and I personally, as a board member, would feel that I should be doing this in a very passive manner, just simply because I want to hear what the folks have got to say. Then that brings me to my second question is, do we have any idea of how well attended if that's the right word, how well attended that virtual meeting will be. Are we getting any kind of feedback? And because of our communications efforts, do we have a pretty good idea that a lot of people know about this meeting tomorrow and they're going to be listening and maybe asking questions while we sit and listen?
Through the Vice Chair, Director Broderick, and I just want to clarify the your earlier question. So the only people who will actually be talking and actually be able to be heard from the listening audience are the panelists, which are the core team members, assistant superintendents, because they're answering the questions. The public who ask a question be using the chat feature to do that, and so there will not be anything heard from the viewing audience. So just to provide clarification for the logistics of it. But to answer your other question, yes, we do plan to look at analytics. We can determine how many people are actually watching that particular live stream, and if we go based on previous experience and meetings. The previous safely returned to school meetings were very well attended. They're convenient. Families can listen and watch as they're doing other things, participating. They can do it in the comfort of their own home. So they were very well attended.
All right, thank you very much, Chief Turner. Thank you, Chief Counsel Long, and thank you, Superintendent Gothard, for helping this technology challenged elder statesman understand how this meeting is going to happen tomorrow. And I hope that we have wonderful participation and that people get a chance to get the information that they want. And I sincerely mean that. Thank you very much, because I get a little confused once in a while, as some of you have noticed.
Director Ellis?
I just wanted to know what the capacity is for EduVision. So if we get 1,500 people on this call or more, is that like, do we have the capacity for that? Like, what is the limit, so to speak?
Through the Vice Chair, Director Ellis, I don't know if the team has any of the direct answers to that in terms of numbers. One thing we do need to keep in mind is that, last year using this system, it was something that directly impacted all students, all families. And I'm not at all minimizing the impact of Envision SPPS, but it is a much smaller direct group. Now, granted, there will be people who are interested and who are engaged that are outside of those directly impacted. Don't get me wrong, but I feel confident that if we could handle the capacity last year during a pandemic that was impacting everyone, that we'll be able to handle tomorrow night and subsequent nights.
Well, I know like during one of the fireside chats, as Director Broderick calls it, it went down and then we had to start again. And so I'm worried that if we have any technical difficulties, does that mean it starts immediately again? If it goes down, like once we get up, it will still continue, or will that be something we reschedule?
Through the Vice Chair, Director Ellis, one, there isn't a limit on it. As many people that has access to the link, which is everyone that has access to Wi-Fi, would be able to watch it. And in the event that we were to go down, have a technical difficulty, we have members of the team who are participating as if they are the viewing audience, and we're discussing through a back channel to know that immediately something happened and we need to restate what we just said, or we need to take a 5-minute recess until we can figure out the technology, and then we come back on again and encourage people to go back to the link.
And then my other question was about the Hmong, Karen, Somali, and Spanish information sessions. Like, can you tell me, are those meetings for each of the individual schools, or is that all of the schools that are impacted having a meeting with our Hmong families, our Karen families, our Somali families?
Through the Vice Chair, Director Ellis, it's both and will be happening. So the actual meetings that we have stated here, those are the same exact meetings that will be done tomorrow night, but rather than in English, they will be done in the native language. And then there are school-based meetings that are happening based on their language needs. They are having either additional meetings or added interpreters to the English meeting. So this was really an effort. Some of the feedback that we heard last time, that there was some difficulty with the interpretation when in the English meeting. So for this time, we wanted to have language-specific meetings. So for instance, on November 1st, for the Hmong information session, the entire meeting will be done in Hmong. So the questions will be from the participant typed in Hmong. It will be interpreted and then interpreted to, for instance, if one of the questions was to me, because I don't speak Hmong, the interpreter will translate that question for me and say, Chief Turner, there is a question about what does it mean to have a Hmong dual program? And I would answer that in English, and then the interpreter would then translate that back in Hmong to the entire audience. So we felt that that was a better way to do it, and it was more respectful to do the actual meeting in the native language. It's feedback we heard from our parents and Office of Communications and Family Engagement.
Okay, and then my question is, have we had meetings with all school communities that are possibly impacted? Have all of those meetings already happened at the sites?
Through the Vice Chair, no, they will continue. I believe the last one is scheduled for the second week of November, the 10th. The last one is scheduled for November 10th. But we have meetings every day, Monday through Friday. Well, I should say Monday through Thursday. I don't think we actually have any Friday meetings scheduled. But there's meetings happening every night. There's meetings actually happening this evening. And so the Office of Schools, along with assistant superintendents, are making those meetings, and they're chairing those meetings along with the principals. And so we're able to handle that capacity and make sure we can get to all of the schools.
And so then information that's coming out of those meetings, where is that information going, and when will board members get it?
Through Vice Chair Director Ellis, that's coming up.
Okay.
Any other questions? Director Carrillo?
Yeah, I have more of a set of concerns regarding the engagement, and I did have one small follow-up question within the concerns, but I'll just wanted to say that when we started this process for Envision SPPS, we were presented with the procedure, the engagement process, the data, and the criteria to propose sites for the envisioning process. Also, we were told that envisioning process would be multi-step. We're kind of getting a sense of that, but specifically the engagement, and I'm going to use Wellstone Elementary as an example. We need to think about how we began with a plan, and all of a sudden when everything was announced, we get a different picture, and that's what the feedback that we're getting from the community. I wanted to highlight that we're closing obviously a school that according to the data was a green school, aside from the strategic error, in my opinion, of closing a healthy, nurturing learning community in an overall declining district environment, and one that captures over 50 pre-K students, which we just learned was very important for the enrollment of students. The engagement process has highlighted some shortcomings, and the first one was conversations that happened before the engagement process happened after the announcement. So we were told about conversations with West Side community. I would like to know who in particular and when, and if there are meeting minutes or notes taken during that meeting that we could understand what conversations were had and what agreements were made with particular parties. Conversations that were had with the Montessori community, French immersion and Hmong immersion. Those are perfectly valid conversations that can be had during a work group process. Spanish immersion community, however, was not engaged. Now, we brought that up during the previous board meeting. The staff held the first meeting with the Spanish community while the public comment was happening at our own Board of Education meeting. And furthermore, when we heard about the outcome of that meeting, we were simply told that parents just were told what the plan is and this is it. Sorry, nothing else to talk about. I cannot stress how hurtful it is to have a discussion led without any courtesy or tact, both to the community and to us as a board. We care about people coming, and when meetings are co-scheduled, I think it's a little bit of an interference to our function as a board. Public engagement has been sorely underdeveloped and undervalued based on our preliminary experience. And in speaking with historical figures in our community and past rounds of closures that have happened in the last, 30, 40 years, this is not something new. This is something that we're repeating the same mistakes of the past. Feel like we're rushing through and hoping that we can get a yes vote on November 16th, but we're not building trust and creating buy-in for people and to what the overall plan is. I hope that we can use these meetings that are coming up to change our strategy, because otherwise people are not going to jump on this bus. They're gonna slash the tires, and that's my big concern.
Thank you.
Any other questions, board members?
As
I would like to have someone
Broderick.
excuse me, I'm sorry. Thank you. I would like to have someone from administration respond to Director Carrillo's concerns.
Through the Vice Chair, maybe if I go on and continue to what the other sessions are, that might be helpful. Then I'll wrap up with the.
Thank you.
So, in addition to the information sessions, which is to provide clarity so that people actually have the accurate information, the listening sessions are to do just what Dr. Carrillo and others have said, is to hear parents' feedback, staff feedback, community feedback about the particular recommendations. And that's the time and opportunity to come to the board to say, I'm upset, I don't like this option, it's not fair, I didn't get engagement, people didn't hear me. It's also a time that people will likely come in support of a particular recommendation as well. So those sessions are on October 28th. And there's also one listed at November 11th. You'll notice that we are, one's listed as a listening session, the other one's listed as a public hearing. And that discussion was last week. Although it has been determined, we don't believe that we necessarily, based on our recommendations, we have to have a public hearing. We are covering our bases in having a public hearing. So the one on October 28th, the meeting, and the one on the 11th is actually being noted as an official public hearing. That those meetings begin at 5:30 in this space, in this room. And we are inviting parents, community members, to come forth with their public comment. We're allowing up to 3 minutes per comment. We are encouraging the public to, once they give their comment, to leave the building and to watch the remaining of the meeting on their platform, their preferred platform, just virtual, because we really want to be able to allow space in this room for people who are actually speaking, actually commenting. Due to the space limitations, we're also trying to support social distancing. It's helpful for people who actually want to speak. So how that actually flows is on the night of and or before. As you walk in the building, the Office of Family Engagement will greet families, ask them if they would like to make a comment. If they would like to make a comment, they fill out their information, name and information that that the vice chair would be able to call on who's ever conducting the meeting, call on by name and say, Jackie Turner, you may now come up to the microphone and provide 3 minutes of testimony or comment. And we will continue those until that all comments have been heard. That is an opportunity for the board to hear from the community how a particular community is feeling regarding a particular space. And I encourage the board to take that time. And as you are listening to some of the feedback and concerns, and this is another reason why it's important to look at the data. And we shouldn't necessarily base our decision on the number of people that show up. Because there very well may be some communities that may not physically be here, but they might have the same impression. So again, if we base our decision off of who brings the most people, what organization is the most coordinated, that may not align with the data that says it. What that aligns with is what community has the most organized community, who can physically get here, who can afford as a community to bring in coordinated posters, colored T-shirts. Says nothing about necessarily the data. And I'm not discouraging community from doing that. We are actually meeting as a team to talk about how we support that, because we don't want to discourage that. But we are going to have, and Vice Chair Vu, I strongly encourage, as we meet with the community tomorrow, that we help the community understand that while we do want to have, not tomorrow, sorry, on the 28th, on Thursday, while we encourage the public to come and give public comment, we do want to do this in decent and in order. And that we are going to follow our expectations that are safe and respectful. The team will be encouraging that as members of the community come. We certainly want to hear from everyone, but we also want to do it in a respectful manner. So the team will be making sure that members of the community are coming and bringing forth that. We will be discouraging a lot of chants and loud exertions and running and movement in this space. We heard last time that in the overflow space, that because of all of the additional yelling and chants, that people weren't able to hear the public commenter. So we are going to ask that this board support that and ask the public to govern themselves accordingly. So that will be the expectations of the listening sessions. We are going to encourage the board, and I'm sure you will do this, to stay until the last person has spoken. And the team is staffing it accordingly for that. We are likely going to, depending on how long it goes, we may ask for the board to take an intermission or take a break in between. But otherwise, the purpose of the 28th and 11th is to hear. There very well may be a topic that comes up, something that the core team overlooked. For some reason, if we misread the data, we were wrong about a particular capacity on the site, you may hear that. And you may take notes of that and then ask the core team to go back and say, we heard from a number of members of X community that all said that this school is too small for the program. And Director Parent, would you please go back and verify that information and bring forth? So we do know that some questions may come up. It is also not in the public hearing, nor the listening session is intended to be a back and forth. And we're asking the board to adhere to that. It's a time for you to take good notes, reflect, and anything you want administration to follow up on, we'll be happy to do that. It's requested and suggested that you don't get into a back and forth dialogue with community, because you're not going to be able to do that with all community members. So it looks as though you are giving favoritism to one community if you respond back to community A with their question, but don't respond back to community B. So in an effort to be equitable and fair to all, we ask the board that you don't respond, as well as superintendent and administration. We will not be responding to specific questions or concerns tomorrow. It's a time for listening.
Chief Turner, are you finished?
I am finished with those. Will also be live streamed, so families are able to watch that from the comfort of their home as well. I'm finished with that particular one, and then just follow our. Lastly, on the information meetings with the affected sites, I want to thank the assistant superintendents. They really have been adjusting their calendar to make sure all these happen. Those started on October 20th. They'll go through the 10th of November. And the questions that they really are gathering from parents and participants are the two questions that you have up there. What component, actions, or activity need to be conducted, planned, or facilitated to help with the potential transition? So Director Cobb, as you asked, that's really where we want to hear from school A or B. What is it that you want as a school community to help you feel transition? Is it circles? Is it additional meetings? Would you like to visit the new school? So we will hear from parents in that way. And then the second question is, what specific support could the district provide? Maybe it is we would like to have resources to pay for a facilitator. Maybe it is we need money to pay for a bus so we can all go over and visit the new program, but to ask specifically. And then the assistant superintendents are gathering information from those two questions. And then the last one is that they're taking down general themes. So they will come back and be able to share that information. And that's the information that we plan to share on the November 8th. Some on November 1st if we have enough information, and then follow up again on November 8th on those Monday nights with what we've been hearing from School A, from School B. Those meetings are being recorded. So in the event that members of the community ask a question or board or administration needs to go back and review, certainly we can do that. And then lastly, as we close out, we have 3 more work sessions coming up on a Monday night. The November 8th, we want to be very transparent with that one. That's also the night of one of the sessions. And so we're going to have to be really efficient with our time because we have a session that starts on the at 6 o'clock. So we'll come with you for a very limited topic on that night for the actual work session, and then the administration will need to go into a virtual session. Then committee of the board meeting on the 9th, we will share information from exit surveys, other information about why families are making other choices. And then again on the 16th of November is when we anticipate and bring forth the vote. That's the actual time of events. I also want to remind the board and the community that after November 16th is really where a lot of the traditional engagement, that what most people are used to when you say engagement, where there'll be a room full of people and people will be able to have scenarios or ideas, and you put your yellow dots or you put your most liked outcome on the wall, because that's really where there's a lot of room for autonomy to talk and think about what our new merged community look like and what are the things that will happen, what's the timeline. And that's really where the parent teams and school teams will really roll up their sleeves and move forward with an engagement model that most people are used to when you talk about engagement. But Director Vu or Vice Chair Vu, I stand ready for any additional questions.
Are there questions by board members?
I do have a follow-up.
Dr. Creo.
Thank you, Vice Chair Vu. There was a parent who came in the Board of Education meeting who was needing translation, and the translation itself made the conversation go slower. She ran out of time. What is the standard procedure in these situations? Should we be equitable to parents who need translation, and for us to be able to provide them the equitable allotted time that they would require with the back and forth? Do we need to increase their time? Is that possible? Is that even allowable under our current organizing rules?
So through the Vice Chair, I'm Director Creel. Yes, and some people may not even realize what's going on, but there is communication between our Dana Abrams, who has traditionally monitored our public speaking or our public comment time, and she will continue to do that tomorrow, along with Mr. Bryan, typically Sarah Dalkey. But there is communication that goes back and forth between them. So to answer your question, we do allow additional time. And it typically ends up being on a case-by-case basis because different languages take longer. So we don't say you have an exact 2 more minutes or 1 more minute. Some languages take longer to translate what has or interpret what has been said in English. So where we begin to monitor a little bit more closely and may ask the speaker to end their comment is if they then move on to another topic, because then that's not fair, equitable. So if we find that a person has started out talking about School B, for instance, closing, and they want to give their impression, but then later that same person may ask about, well, what is, can I get a bus for a particular school? Or they change the topic completely and move on to achievement of the school, or they want to complain about their school facilities, it's not clean. Whatever the case is, if they move on to a different topic, then that's when we ask that, I'm sorry, your time is up. But we plan to be very respectful of that. When families come in to the room, Office of Family Engagement will be in the lobby asking if families need an interpreter and what language, and they will be grouped by that interpreter.
Dr. Broderick.
My question might be pretty quick, and I'll address it to General Counsel Long. We made a distinction between 10:28, which is going to be a listening session, and 11:11, which we're now calling a public hearing. And I think the reason for that is because we're still, I think it sounds like, unsure of the difference in terms of the need for a public hearing if it's a temporary closing rather than a closing. And so therefore, because we want to absolutely be in line with the Minnesota state statutes on this, my question is, what makes it a temporary closing? And in the case of buildings where we have no definitive option identified right now for the use of that building, does that still mean that it's a temporary closing if we are not able to give a definite answer in terms of when our expectation will be that it is going to open again? I think I'm going around the barn again, but I think General Counsel Long has listened to my questions before, and I think he can maybe figure out what I'm asking is, will we need a public hearing even for schools that we are only quote unquote temporary closing if we have not given a definite answer as to when the expectation for that building to reopen would be?
Vice Chair Vu, members of the board, Superintendent Gothard, Director Broderick. Yes, you're correct. We are going to interpret that statute as broadly as possible and provide for the public hearing as is required under Minnesota Statute 123B.51. And for the buildings where we have plans for them, but we don't have, those plans are not necessarily definitively determined at this time. We can't say, for example, if we were closing a building to do construction, knowing that a year and a half from now we would be reopening it and bringing students back. That would probably fall under the temporary closure provision where a public hearing is not required under statute, but there's nothing that precludes a public hearing even in a temporary closure like that.
Yes. Because obviously you can understand that if we, and without naming a particular building, let's just say building A, we say that we are temporarily closing it, but we do not have a definite plan to announce in terms of when it will reopen and what it will be when it reopens. So with that in mind, we're sort of in a state of limbo, and people are going to be wondering, well, what are you going to do with that building? If a year passes by, if 2 years pass by, if 3 years pass by, and the building is still in mothballs, were we honest with the public when we said it was a temporary closing?
Through the Vice Chair, Director Broderick, that's why we are following and being broader and doing a formal public hearing. Again, for a temporary closure, the statute says that the formal public hearing is not required, but even in a temporary situation where we were to say, for example, building A is going to be closed while we do a construction project and building A will reopen on X date, definitive date in the future. Even in that situation, even though not statutorily required, we could still hold a formal public hearing, and that's what we are doing in this situation for all of the buildings that are affected under Envision SPPS.
Okay, so in other words, by doing this and calling this event on November 11th a public hearing, we will be satisfying our legal requirement to have a public hearing, even though we're having a public hearing actually for a temporary closing, or what we have defined as a temporary closing. So my issue, I think, or my concern is that whereby we are observing our legal requirement, I think I'm afraid that the people may be concerned about our real intent to be transparent and open and honest with them in terms of what our actual plan is. And that does not preclude the fact that maybe this is not the time to have an actual definite plan, but then we have to, once again, make sure that the public understands that that's the process that we're involved in at this moment in time. My concern really always is two words that both start with T: transparency, and transparency builds trust, even if when you're transparent, you're not always telling people what they want to hear. As long as you're transparent, they might trust you.
Any more questions by board members? Dr. Cobb.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Just more of a comment than a question, just as we're entering into the next 3 weeks of these conversations, just being mindful that of setting an intention to engage compassionately in our listening and our words through the next 3 weeks. Feelings are tender right now, and I think we have to approach every conversation understanding that. And sometimes things we say in technical terms feel differently to the school community who's hearing them. And so just to, I've just heard from community members that things they heard in meetings that I'm sure were not intended to be hurtful were. And I want to hear that and just ask that all of us hold each other accountable to being compassionate, humane listeners in the next 3 weeks as we're going through the rest of this process. Thank you.
Any other questions by board members? I had questions around the listening sessions. So theoretically, depending on how many speakers we have, that's how long we'll go for. Is that correct, Chief Turner?
Vice Chair Wu, yes, that is correct.
So there is no time limit. It's just when we have completed all the speakers who have signed up on that. Before, right? 5:30 p.m. Or
Vice Chair, we are recommending and encouraging that the board continued to take the request. So for instance, if somebody walks into the space at 6 o'clock and they haven't gotten here by 5:30, that they're able to sign up. We actually, our suggestion, the initial meeting was scheduled from 5:30 to 7:30. So really people can come in at any time between those times to actually sign up. And if 300 people or 400 people are here by 7:30 and sign up, then, and if it takes us till 11 o'clock p.m., then we stand in attentiveness based on what Director Kappa said too, to hear their concerns. Although at the same time, if we are at 6:30 and we have heard from everyone, and we have announced over several times, is there additional comment, and there aren't any more, then at that time, we make a decision that we would conclude the public listening session because we have heard from everyone that is physically here in the space. So there will be a little bit of nuance in there and flexibility that I'm trying to allow people time to physically get here, trying to make sure people understand that they have multiple times before we end the evening. Vice Chair Booth, does that answer
It does.
your question?
It does. And for the public information sessions, it is a hard stop at 7:30, correct?
Vice Chair Booth, yes. Although if we, it's 7:30 and we know we have 4 more questions to get to, we're going to encourage the team to stay and answer those questions.
Thank you. And that goes the same for the language specific sessions as well?
Yes.
Thank you. I had questions around the affected school communities. I know that administration is meeting with those communities at their sites. Will the board get a report as to the answers to the questions and the themes that arise?
Vice Chair Vu, yes. That is one of the, as we think about next steps, that is one of the, that's the information we'd like to provide. And so as I was thinking about, as we close this meeting out and think about upcoming meetings, I know there's questions around the budget and allocations, and we plan to bring forth that information for future meetings. Engagement feedback, meeting the specific sites, as well as what the themes that we were hearing from the public information, as well as the public hearings or the listening sessions. We also have said that we would bring back information on the exit surveys, and we have that. And I've heard that we would like to engage respectfully, and we will be encouraging as a team to do that, allow families to be heard and respond back to them appropriately.
Thank you, Chief Turner. And just a quick question about the public hearing and the difference between public hearing and listening session. The format will essentially be the same, but the name of the meeting will just be different. Just help clarify this for me.
Vice Chair Vu, the format will essentially be the same. The reason for designating the 11th as a public hearing is that under Minnesota statute, there's a requirement that in order to close a schoolhouse, that we hold a formal public hearing, that hearing be noticed in the school district's legal newspaper for the 2 weeks prior to that hearing. So that is why we are designating the 11th as the public hearing. And it's as I said, a statutory requirement that hearing must be held before the board takes action on the proposal.
Just one more suggestion. On November 16th, I would like to see all this information that we have accumulated and gathered from engagement be presented on the 16th before we vote. I'd like some sort of comprehensive analysis or some presentation of the information or the themes that have come up during these different types of engagements, just so we have an informed vote on that day. Thank you.
I would just echo Director Vu's request, and I would like to hope that we could have that at least during the weekend prior to the meeting on the 16th, so that we get a chance to digest that. Would you be agreeable to that, Vice Chair Wu and Joe? Thank you. Just another remark on that I feel I should make. Early in the evening, I made a reference to Dr. Gothard's fireside chats during the pandemic, which were trying times for everyone in this room and everyone in the world. I failed to mention, and I'm going to do this now, how reassuring and informative Dr. Gothard was in those virtual fireside chats. I came away feeling better, and because of the reassurance that he projected and the information that he provided in an honest and straightforward manner, I know that people that were watching and listening felt the same way. I guess tonight I would hope that in at least in a tentative way, that I could leave this meeting and go home tonight and go to bed with some of that good feeling that I had after those experiences with those virtual meetings during the pandemic. And I would like to call on Vice Chair Vu and Superintendent Gothard to maybe make some closing remarks tonight on October 25th that'll make us feel confident and ready to take on the challenges ahead of us between now and November 16th. And I know this is a last minute request, but I feel confident that Jim Boo and Joe Gothard can say to us as a board, and at the same time to anyone else who is watching this in the live stream, where we're at right now and how we're going to work very hard to be at a good place on November 16th. So, Joe, Jim, would you do that for me?
Thank you, Director Broderick. First, are there any questions remaining from the board members? Thank you. If not, then I'd just like to respond to Director Broderick. I just wanted to say to the public that is watching, the public who will stream this later, that these engagements are designed for you. The board is conscientious about engagement. We want to hear your perspectives about this. We want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear you pick apart our rationale on this plan, because that's how this plan gets better by November 16th. And as I've said, I'd like our administration to accumulate all this information, everything that we've gathered from all this engagement, and come present it on the board on the 16th, so that not just me, but all our board members here can make an informed vote on the 16th. Superintendent Gothard, do you have any closing remarks?
Thank you, Vice Chair Vu, members of the board, staff, and community. You know, I started July 1st, 2017, and even before I arrived, there was already lists that were given to me. Lists that were small schools in our district that were looked at as not viable, and that sadly were portrayed as not able to use our resources to the best of our abilities because of the subsidizing that would take place there. And of course, you get that information when you start. And I didn't make any promises or make any statements about that. I wanted to learn more. I quickly learned that I don't think there's a building in our district that doesn't open the doors to caring staff, to amazing children, and to families who want so much for their kids. So this is hard. I mean, this is a regretful place to be for any superintendent or board or staff for that matter, and certainly for the staff and parents as well. Through the charge of the board and through a strategic plan, though, I did make a commitment to this community to look at resources in a different way and to try to provide a process by which we do that. I still don't believe that there's any process that would help us go out into our community that would have a community say, you know what, let's close our school. I mean, that's the reality of it. You're looking at a man now who grew up as a kid around the corner from my elementary school. I understand what this means to our community. And as Director Carrillo said earlier, has been, for decades, unfortunately, with some of the changes that the district has gone through. So I empathize. I really do. At the same time, Director Broderick likens us back to last year or 2 years, I don't know how many years now, about the fireside chats. And, with those, there was always really hard days with that sense of things are going to get better. And, we're not quite at that place right now because we're talking about concepts that are not alive yet. They're, what we've heard in terms of what we want to envision for well-rounded education. And there's some that's yet to be determined. So with that, there's confusion. There's a lack of understanding. And as a product of that, there's a lack of belief and trust in the process. I understand that too. I felt obligated to provide the Board of Education recommendations, comprehensive recommendations, 10% of our student body, that would allow us to focus on how to create more well-rounded educational opportunities, knowing that we're in a position where we are going to have to reduce resources in St. Paul Public Schools due to declining enrollment, that the American Rescue Plan dollars are very different from our general operating dollars, and it is great, and it's really going to support us and bolster us a lot. But long term, we're not going to be able to count on that. This is providing administration the flexibility to use resources in a different way for us to better account for the number of students that we currently have. I don't think there's any way we could have sliced this where there would have been, any, different mood or reaction to our community. And I understand that, and I come to accept that and knew going into it. We talked about this early on with Envision, that there were likely going to be recommendations that were really hard for our community, hard for all of us, for that matter. I don't think anybody likes this. So I want to continue to work with you, board, and provide you the information that you need. But I really feel that it was my charge to bring you recommendations about how to shape our district differently so that we could provide resources in a different way.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, we move to adjournment. As a reminder, a calendar of the upcoming of the meetings is available on Envision SPPS website at spps.org/envision. With that, a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
That was seconded by Director Ellis. Vote, please.
Director Cott.
Yes.
Director Carrillo.
Yes.
Director Ellis is yes. Director Vu.
Yes.
Director Broderick.
Yes.
Director Allen.
Yes.
Motion to adjourn passes 6-0. Time is 8:27. We are adjourned.